Hello, hello, everyone. Happy Saturday. Yes, I'm losing track of the days again. But good news, it's time for another debate review. I'm joined once again by Mark Reed. How are you today, sir?
It's not Saturday.
Oh, you future people.
Is that a new graphic? Is that a new graphic that you've got, like for the debate reviews kind of thing? I don't
Oh,
recall ever seeing that before.
the intro thing. Yeah, I've used it a couple of times.
Okay. I
It's very similar to the Atheist Lives one. I just changed out
okay.
the last few seconds for that effect because I'm
Okay.
like,
I have
it's
not
cool.
been paying attention then. That's fantastic. How are you, Ember? How
Oh,
are
it's
you?
alright. Aside from not knowing what day it is, it's alright.
Well, you did. It's just yeah, time zones. I I find it problematic at the best of times. I keep having this overriding fear that you've moved into like past daylight savings time. I think it's daylight savings at the moment, and
Hmm.
into like normal time, and I'm going to miss it. So um, it would actually be easier if we did daylight savings over here, but we don't. So
Well,
um,
there's talk
yeah,
of us stopping doing that because it's
that
really
would be
annoying.
helpful.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Um,
I don't know where we are with that though.
there's certain reasons. There's not a lot of good reasons for having. I think the tradespeople sort of that get up in the morning over here. I think that's one of the reasons why, because they kind of it's helpful for them to work when it's not as hot over here. But I'm not sure if
Mm.
you have the same problems, kind of thing. We are tangenting already. Have you noticed that we've
Yes,
tangent,
yes,
and this
indeed.
one's entirely my fault, 100% my fault. Yeah, so the review. Apparently you said it was doing. People were talking about it, so that's really good.
Yeah, yeah. I saw a couple of comments. Of course, part one. This is a part two. Part one was over
Yep.
on your channel, and I saw some comments, and I got some messages, and people were like, this is good. I want to see the end of this." So, actually, you
Yeah,
picked a
yeah.
brilliant place to stop last week because as I was punching up the video just now,
Hmm.
right after the applause that you paused on, the moderator comes out and says, "Okay, it's time for an intermission."
Oh,
I'm like,
well,
"Okay."
nice, nice. Yeah, so we know exactly what we're doing over here. Contrary to all public opinion, we actually know what we're doing, which is great,
Yes.
which is
It's
fantastic.
much to the surprise of everyone, including us.
Yeah, exactly. I might link part one, so if you do want to go and watch it and catch up or whatever, and watch it later, maybe have a
Sure
sort
thing.
of temporal shift of watching, like watch the end, the part two, and then part one. That would be awesome.
Yeah, be epic
I'll
fun.
pop that in
It
chat.
is linked in the
Yeah.
description too, but having it in the chat would be handy.
So, do we
Couple of
really have to listen to Mark? I think so. I mean, I can go if you want. Wow. Wow, Azo's just getting
as is pretty spicy lately.
throwing shade. And yes, you are still
Yeah.
on fire. Oh, Azo meant for 2 months. There you go. Awesome,
Yeah, yeah.
man.
Couple of quick announcements. As
Hmm.
of course was um, definitely my first Patreon supporter, and among the first, if not the
Hmm.
first, channel member once that option became available. And yeah, as you can see from his icon, as is still on fire.
Yeah,
Actually,
absolutely.
the icon evolves when you hit 2 months. It goes from like a little fire to a big fire. So he's very on fire.
Hmm. Awesome.
Yeah, and other people are well on their way to getting the upgraded flame sigil. Eric Wander joined. I think that was last night actually, but it showed up in my chat
Okay.
just now.
Yep.
So hey, yeah, welcome, welcome, welcome. Enjoy some emojis, and there's a bunch of other perks, but I can never remember what they all are. But the emojis
And
are fun.
you've also got a
And
Calasia
yeah,
789. Yeah, there we go. Yep.
yeah, Kalasia rejoined at the blaze level, gets all the perks, and yeah, sometimes people will join, and then it won't auto renew, and then a couple of days later they'll rejoin, and I don't know what the
Yep.
time window is, but if you do it quick enough, you don't lose your upgraded badge kind of thing. I'm not sure, but glad to have
Nobody
collision
knows
around.
what YouTube's
Yeah,
doing. I'm the last person to know what YouTube's doing, quite frankly. Your
I
blood
feel
pressure
that.
is a well.
But
Chill
yeah,
out. Put your
yeah,
feet up, as a yeah. Chill out, man.
absolutely.
We're going to be reviewing the second half of the debate. The first half was really good. Actually, it is a good debate. It really is. Even though I know that Wacky Lane Craig is kind of he's sort of angling at verging on fallacies, but all in all,
Mm,
look, William Lane Craig, I don't think he's that bad. Like if you compare him to some of the other theist debaters, he's not that bad. Um, yeah, I don't know.
yeah.
There's
Sadly,
worse.
I have to admit that.
There's a lot. I mean, you compare him to Hovind, and he's leagues ahead of Hovind or something. At least you can listen to him and go, yeah, I disagree, but at least you're making a coherent argument and not but fish don't come from bacteria. I just
Yeah, your mother was a strawberry.
you're marketing earlier to a strawberry.
Buy my DVDs.
Buy my DVDs.
Speaking of debates, though, it technically is a
Yeah.
tangent, but it's better to get it before rather than risk forgetting after. You yourself have another debate coming up very soon, yes?
I do. I have two coming up actually, both on
Ooh.
modern day debate. So the first one is, I believe it's on like against theism, like atheism versus theism, or atheism versus creation. So it's evolutionary process. Um, and the second one is against my friend Hassan, the Muslim guy that I interviewed a couple of times. He's a really nice guy, actually. I get along really well with him. So that should be fantastic. And that one's about morality, which I love having debates about, because I love that everybody claims objective morality, but they can't seem to provide how it's objective, which I just adore. Yeah, so that should be interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of still unanswered questions. Also random tangent, but
Sure.
what's his name? McDowell, the guy with the short hair mohawk. He posted a thing on I guess the X is pronounced in the Chinese fashion, so it would be shitter now. Which kind of tracks. But it was a honest question. What if you could ask any question to a Christian? What would it be? And I said, I still don't understand the Trinity. I have asked so many people, and nobody can
Oh,
explain
sure.
it to me. So
Sure. Yeah.
yeah, maybe someday we'll get an explanation on that, along with
Maybe.
this objective morality business.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
The Trinity just boggles my mind. I've never had a decent answer for that one, and yeah. I hope one day there will be a decent answer. But, it's one of those philosophical questions where it seems to be unanswerable at the moment, much less sort of not getting an answer. It might just be one of those philosophical questions that's completely, like hard solipsism or the many and the one. There's these problems that are just unanswerable, basically. They just can't be answered, which is interesting. They're good to think about, though, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, speaking of hard solipsism, there's a version of that in this debate, and that lets us segue into recapping what happened in part one.
Ooh,
There there was a whole lot of talk about Boltzmann brains and the
yes,
probability of our universe being designed.
correct. Yes.
Yeah, it
But
it
Boltzmann's brain is a interesting thought exercise, but it's only a thought exercise. It's not meant to be taken seriously. Basically, you're comparing something happening in this universe to a brain in a vat in another universe, just making it up in its head, basically. So it's
mm,
really just a thought exercise, which is more probable. So an abductive exercise. Um, it isn't given a lot of um, credibility as far as this is the world we live in kind of thing. But it's interesting to think about.
yeah, it's I don't know. I like the Matrix
Yeah.
idea better. It
Oh,
just
yeah, and that's what most people are familiar with. Absolutely. Um, okay, so Aunt Jerry, in your Christian school, we're taught the Trinity is like the apple, the skin, the flesh, and the core. Yeah, the problem with that is, if you're saying that it's like saying, well, the skin of the apple is the apple, like the entirety of the apple, and the flesh of the apple is the entirety of the apple, and the core is the entirety. Like, it doesn't work. It's fine if you say, hey, they're all parts of an apple, but you're not. It's sort of, um, oh yeah, and yeah, it makes sense if you don't think about it too hard. But if you start to think
Yeah,
about
when
it, it sort of
you're
goes,
little.
well, yeah. Like, if you've got all the properties associated with a god, and then this next thing you have all the properties associated with a god, and then the next thing is all the properties associated. You have three gods, not one god, but all of them make one god, but they're not parts of the same god. They're all complete and total gods in themselves. Like, they are God in completion. That doesn't make any sense. We just made applesauce.
I
Nice.
like applesauce.
Is that a composition fallacy? Um, it could be, yeah. I suppose, Kata, depending on how you're sort of approaching it, kind of thing. Um, yeah, I suppose it is. So a composition fallacy is assigning things to the parts that are emergent of the whole. So, like, for instance, if you're expecting the atoms of a computer to calculate stuff, that's sort of composition division fallacy. You're assigning stuff to the individual parts that are of the whole. So yeah, it can be,
Yeah,
depending on how you're looking at it.
yeah.
But it's really weird.
I relate to that.
I went into a Trinity stream on, I think it was Standing for Truths, and there was a lot of theists coming in and saying, "Hey, believe in God and everything like that. Don't believe in the Trinity." Like, they were really pushing back hard on it too. So there is a sort of a problem there, right? Even in Christianity, about people not believing. Anyway, we better get onto the debate, Ambrose. Stop me anytime.
Oh,
I've
it's all good.
been, well, I've been kind of hiding a little bit at the moment. Yeah, I just haven't been doing as much as I feel that I should have, or that I've wanted to. But I've sort of just been a bit sort of. Um, I think I'm very introverted. When I get sort of stressed out, I tendency to hide from everybody and sort of do my own thing. Um, yeah, but that's okay. Yeah, so it's good to be back, although I might talk a little bit too much. So stop me anytime, please.
It's all good. It's all good. But yeah, so as far as our recap, Craig is making the case that God is more likely than not
Yes,
because of design,
fine tuning. Yeah.
yeah, fine tuning, and
So he had the teleological argument. He had the cosmological argument, which is basically that the universe has to have a cause, and sort of challenged Sean Carroll on the universe having a cause,
mm,
um, by basically, well, it's very hard not to accuse William Lane Craig of appealing to authority, because he sort of just quoted a bunch of physicists that disagree with Sean Carroll, and I think they are theist physicists at that, and sort of said, well, that's more likely. Then sure I'm not sure how he's evaluating the probabilities here.
yeah, and Carol in turn is just like, this is silly. Here's a bunch of
Hmm.
science, which is fucking cool.
Yeah, and this is what we know and what we don't know, as well. Sort of. So him saying, "Oh, well, the universe had a cause." It's like, well, did the universe have a start? We just don't know. We have no idea. So it seems to me that William Lane Craig is making a Bayesian probability, basically setting it up as, okay, here are the priors. The universe has to have a cause because the universe began to exist. All of these priors laid out, that there is only one universe and things like that, and then appealing to the teleological argument, which is the fine tuning argument, to say, in order for all of these values to be set, there had to be something to set these values, or else by chance it couldn't. It's very unlikely to have happened.
Or
I
at
think
least he
he's
thinks so.
reaching. Well, he's reaching way beyond his arm's length for these priors.
Mhm.
So Sean Carroll, all he has to point to is, and that's what he did do, is point out that, hey, we don't know that these priors are true. We don't know there's one universe. We don't know that the universe began to exist. We don't know all of this stuff. So, and that's when William Lane Craig sort of appeals to these physicists that say, hey, it's very unlikely, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, for all we can tell, our universe is just one of many universes being
Right.
simultaneously run on a quantum computer beyond our comprehension, where every possible universe exists in
Right.
superposition.
Yes. And so he's comparing the Boltzmann brain as saying, well, how more likely is the universe coming out by chance, exactly as it is, to a brain divorced from reality that just is making this stuff up in its own mind, kind of thing. A Boltzmann brain is a isolated brain in a vat, kind of thing, in a possible world, basically, in a possible universe. Um,
Mhm.
which um, if you do go by sort of, if you break the priors that William Lane Craig is saying, and which Sean Carroll is doing, then Boltzmann is really unlikely in comparison to what the chances are, especially if the only way the universe can form is under these specific conditions, or if multiverse is true, the probability that this universe will come about is, if there's infinite universes, the probability of this universe coming about is one. It's 100%. It will happen. It's inevitable. So, I think William Lane Craig's reaching a bit. I really do.
Mhm.
But I
Oh.
mean, philosophers do that. They do reach a bit.
Yeah, that is kind of the goal of philosophy.
Hmm.
Alrighty, so that it's a super summary, but of course, if you're not familiar, part one,
Yeah.
Mark linked it. It's in the description. Do feel free to check that out. And I think we're just about ready to jump in here. Now, I've got you had us on times two speed for part one.
I think it's 1.75, to be honest with you.
Okay, let me see if I can do 1.75. I can. Hooray!
I should have sent you over the file, which was already sped up.
Ah, yes, you did, but I'd already downloaded it from Craig's website.
Oh, okay. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, that's why the timestamps are different because it wasn't pre-sped
Oh,
up.
okay, gotcha. Yeah, no, I didn't like cut out a bit as well from the start, because a lot of the start was just mucking around. So
Ah, yeah, all the introductions and things. Alrighty, so they're just coming back from intermission, and let's
yep.
see where they go next.
Hey, come on. Getting you people back in your seats is like herding philosophers.
But
All right, the last part of our debate will be 8-minute closing statements. And we will begin first with William Lane Craig, and then Sean Carroll. And then we will begin the Q&A after I give you instructions for the Q&A.
Well, perhaps you feel like you've been drinking from a fire hose this evening. But let me, in my final speech, try to draw together some threads of the debate and see if we can draw some conclusions. I hope that it's been obvious tonight that I am not offering God as a theory to compete with scientific theories about the universe. Rather, I am saying that those self-contained secular theories provide evidence for theologically neutral premises in philosophical arguments, leading to a conclusion that has theistic significance. Premises like the universe began to exist, or the fine-tuning is not due to physical necessity or to chance. And if those premises are supported, then it follows deductively that there is a creator and designer of the universe. Dr. Carroll's complaints about theism not making predictions would be only important if I were offering some sort of theistic theory of the world, but I'm not doing so. I'm simply appealing to the cosmological evidence in support of these theologically neutral premises that go to deductively imply the existence of a creator and designer.
okay, can you see the real the dodgy language that he's using here? So he's basically saying theological, like science provides theologically neutral philosophies, kind of thing. So he's trying to say that science gives explanations that and So I know who's copied this, and that's Donnie, who says that, oh, this thing's God agnostic kind of thing. It's like, yeah, there's no evidence of God, so you're basically saying it's neutral. But it's really deceptive language, because he's basically saying, hey, these don't involve God, so it is not for or against it. Yeah, but it's not the burden of the scientist to show that a God doesn't exist. That's your burden. So on a neutral outcome, which is no evidence of God, you lose by default, kind of thing, because you've got to show that it exists. And he also was sort of saying, well, I'm not offering a theory. No, you're not, but you are offering a hypothesis. Well, it's barely a hypothesis because it's unfalsifiable. That's the problem. That's why it won't be a theory. So you still are offering a vague hypothesis on the, like, this thing to say, well, we're not offering a scientific explanation, but you kind of are. Every explanation is kind of, can be a scientific explanation. It's just making it not falsifiable doesn't get you off the hook, Craig. It doesn't.
Yeah, he's also. It feels like he's trying to backpedal away from getting caught in it. Like, I'm not really here to debate. I'm just presenting options. But remember, in his opening and his first rebuttal, his whole thing was, I'm here to show that based on what we know and what we can prove, that a God is more probable than not. And now he's like, listen, I'm not here to debate. I'm just presenting ideas.
And
you're in a debate,
I believe, unless I'm mistaken, his opening started with, well, science in fact supports that there is a God. And now he's kind of going, well, it's neutral. It's not. His actual opening said that science is in support of the God hypothesis, and now you're right. He's just sort of shifting the goalpost to say, hey, never suggested that science said there was a God. Yet that was the principle of your opening, Craig. It was this evidence supports a God.
Yeah, it's. I don't know if it's a smart move or not, because on the one hand, it shows that he knows he's getting spanked. But on the other hand, he's showing that he knows he's getting spanked. So it's like, it's a way to try to hedge and not have a straight up L on his record. But at the same time, everyone can see him doing it. So
yeah.
It's an oof.
Now let's look again at those arguments that I defended. First, the Kalam cosmological argument. Dr. Carroll challenges the first premise that if the universe came into existence, there's a transcendent cause that brought the universe into being. And honestly, I'm quite astonished that he would think the universe can literally pop into being out of nothing. Let me just give three arguments.
Oh, for fuck's sake,
He never
Craig.
said that. What the hell? He never said that. And he said it could be eternal. It could be that the universe has always been here. Because what you're talking about, if space-time is the sort of restricted to the universe, saying what was before time or before space-time is a nonsensical question. Wow,
there,
that's
he gets my straw man.
Nice. That is a big straw man. That is a big, fat straw man.
Ay.
Arguments for why there must be a cause. First of all, it seems to me a metaphysical first principle that being doesn't come from non-being, that things don't just pop into existence from literally nothing.
Well, it may seem that way philosophically, but first of all, we don't have a sample of nothing to test. We've all gone over this time and time again, so we don't know. Yeah. It could be that a true nothing is an unstable state and will decay into a something. We have no idea. But also, we do know that there are particles that pop into and out of existence seemingly with no cause, virtual particles. So
acausal,
yeah, as much of a nothing as we can get within the bounds of our universe seems to indicate things do pop into existence out of nothing for no reason.
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing, like, I think that Craig knows full well that Lawrence Krauss wasn't talking about sort of a philosophical no thing, that what he was describing as nothing was sort of a quantum state with no matter or energy in it, but still had sort of these virtual particles there, these subatomic particles. So can nothing exist? And that's something that sort of I mean, I love Tracy Harris on the Atheist Experience. She's like, how do you have nothing? Like, can nothing exist? Of course, nothing can't exist, because as soon as something exists, it's something. You can't have nothing. It's just a straw man from top to bottom, because not only did Carroll not say that it popped in from nothing, the nothing they're talking about isn't the philosophical no thing. It's and somebody described it as this, right? So if you take matter and antimatter and put them together, it annihilates and it becomes nothing, right? But it's
gamma
not,
rays.
well, it's not nothing. That's the thing. There's still quantum particles there, even after the gamma rays have been released. There's still something there. So in reverse, if you have quantum particles, it could form matter and antimatter. And that's really like dumbed down and simplified and probably slightly incorrect, but that's a good way to think about it. That nothing doesn't mean nothing. It means no substance, no matter, no energy, none of the usual stuff there, but it doesn't mean no thing. This is just, this is really bad from Craig. It's a straw man up and down. It's really reaching a low point when you're going, well, a universe couldn't have come from nothing. Come on, dude. Seriously?
Yeah. And as the third point is that, as half our chat has picked up on, that's actually the theist position, that the universe ex nihilo appeared at the command of God, but it did come out of nothing. So I guess it's kind of a reverse moving the goalposts. It's a pin the tail on the donkey kind of thing. Like, here's my fallacious belief, but I'm going to try to pin it on you to make you look like you're illogical.
Well, so here's the thing about ex nihilo creation in theist mentality. They don't have a problem with things being created from nothing, as long as something is there to do it, right? So they have a problem with something coming from nothing when nothing is there to do it, kind of thing. So it's this weird thing that it's this weird thing where they just say, well, something was there, God was there, and it's like, oh, okay, well, that's great, it was still from nothing. Or it would be more accurate to say that God created the universe from himself. Might be a better way to say it, but of course they never say stuff like that.
Yar. Yeah, there's a lot of Rubix points out a similar irony. People like Kent, who say you evolutionists think we came from rocks, when that's literally their belief. It's a projection kind of thing. Of course, I don't think that's quite the level that Craig is on, but he's dangerously close to that.
Nothingness has no properties, no potentialities. It's not anything. And so it seems to me inconceivable metaphysically to think the universe could come into being from nothing. Secondly, if the universe could come into being from nothing, then why is it that only universes can pop into being out of nothing? Why not bicycles and Beethoven?
That's what I keep asking. If God poofs everything into existence, why don't we see anything being poofed into existence today?
If the initial conditions of the universe can pop into existence from nothing, why would we expect bicycles? That's after the universe has been going, then bicycles are produced. Oh, fun fact I found out about bicycles that probably everybody knew. Apparently they did a analysis of the most efficient ways animals travel, and humans were on there as well, kind of thing, and we're apparently about a third of the way down. We're pretty efficient, but apparently the top one is condors that can fly for ages just by sort of adjusting their wings. Incredibly efficient travel means. And then they did bicycles as well, and that blew every single animal out of the water as far as efficiency for travel is concerned. Like, bicycles, absolutely incredible. And it's really interesting that we've invented a more efficient form of travel than God did. Don't know how that happened, but
We're very clever little apes, aren't we?
very clever apes.
Yeah. All right, let's see what his third point is. See if he can make it a whole 2 sentences before we have to stop him again.
And root beer. What makes nothingness so discriminatory? If universes could pop into being out of nothing, then anything and everything should pop into being out of nothing. Since it does.
Wow. That's a
Wow.
that is low even for him. That is a
Yeah.
I can't even see how that could be a misunderstanding on his part.
Yeah.
Like it's I can't see it being anything other than dishonesty.
Well, the first part was straw man. This is getting to just ridiculous levels of sort of, it's almost non sequitur, isn't it? You know, like, you know, you might as well say, hey, if God can poof everything into existence, why don't we see, you know, my meals poofed into existence? Why do things have to grow at all? Why don't they just poof into existence, kind of thing? Like it's a really bad argument.
Yeah, I mean, and not only does it apply to his worldview more than Carroll's, but it also it's like, I don't know, he's got to be really, really desperate, because I can't imagine that in his philosopher mind he's going, premise 1, universes exist.
Yeah.
Premise 2, pizza sleeps fast under the west, therefore the mudge. Premise 3, God exists. Like, it just, it's so removed.
Yeah.
Doesn't that suggest
So
that
I don't know. I don't know how you'd set up a syllogism for that one. Like, premise 1, the universe came from nothing. Premise 2, things can come from nothing. Premise 3, bicycles come. Look, what? Move on. I don't know where he's going with that one.
I know, it's...
That point was as bad as his tie, quite frankly. No, I'm not going to hassle a man's tie. I draw the line with that.
Yeah, I kind of like that tie, but I'm also weird.
That's all right.
of causes. And finally, all the empirical evidence we have supports the truth of the causal principle. When Dr. Carroll says, oh, but the universe is different than our experience, this is really committing what Alexander Proust calls the taxicab fallacy. That is to say, you go with the causal principle until you reach your desired goal, and then you think you can just dismiss it like a hack because you don't want there to be a cause of your entity, the universe. But if the universe came into existence, if the universe is not eternal, then surely it would need to have a cause. And in fact, to deny this is unscientific because the whole project of contemporary cosmogony is to try to find what is the cause of the universe. So on his principle, it would be a science stopper and would destroy his very field of expertise. Now, with respect to the second premise that the universe did begin to exist, could we have slide 33, please? In response to my argument that he
could have just called it special pleading. He didn't have to go that long way around like he did.
Yeah, and he didn't have to call him a hack either. That's pretty bad. And plus, even if the universe didn't have cosmologists and astronomers don't just look for the cause of the universe. You know that, right? Like, that's like, he's like, oh, if the universe didn't have a cause, that destroys your area of expertise. No, he'll find other things to study in the universe. Like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't.
Yeah, like maybe, again, he used that word cosmogony. The last time we heard it was in part 1. It's the first time I've come across it, but it basically, it's different from cosmology, which is the study of not just the universe, but the whole cosmos, including anything that may be beyond the universe. Cosmogony is the study of origin myths and hypotheses, basically trying to figure out which one, if any, is true. If it turns out there was no beginning, then we just don't need one. It's like phrenology. We just dismiss that discipline as no longer relevant.
But I must point out that Sean Carroll is not a cosmogonist, right? That's not what he does. He's a cosmologist, which, there is no cosmogonist. That's the thing. Like, we study the origins of the universe as far back as we can. Even if it was a causal thing or it was eternal, it doesn't mean that the field is destroyed. What are you talking about, Billy? Come on.
Yeah, he's awful sloppy just now.
Yeah.
of time going in two opposite directions. Do we have slide 33? Alas. No, the one before it. That's 34. There, look at that diagram. This is a different diagram. Notice on this diagram, you have a non-reductionistic arrow of time that goes from past to future. This is not an arrow of time that is determined by entropy increase as he had in the other diagram. This is a non-reductionistic view of time that Professor Maudlin and I believe in, where entropy, the direction of entropy increase doesn't define the direction of time. On this model, the universe contracts down from eternity past for infinity to a relatively low entropy point and then begins to expand again. And that kind of model is physically impossible.
I don't think that's what's being represented there.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
Because even though we do have an arrow of time overall, we see local arrows of time are being pointed to in these baby universes, which strongly implies that these arrows of time are also the local time flow in the baby universes down here. So this is an arrow of time only with regards to the parent universe.
And that would be the cosmos in the middle, right? And we're just talking about we are in one of the local presentations of these baby universes. So it doesn't matter which way the universe comes out in regards to the overall time in the cosmos. Our local presentation of the universe will start time in a direction of entropy, sort of, you know, whichever way that it comes out.
Yeah, and there's math to support this. String theory may be mostly hidden in the closet now because we don't have a way to test or verify any part of it, but it did provide us some very useful mathematical formulas to explore multidimensional functions. And so we already have the math to describe an interface between universes, our 3 spatial dimension and 1 temporal dimension spacetime interfacing with another 4D or more universe where some kind of high energy event results in the arrow of time shifting direction, giving rise to a new presentation of spacetime, which we call our universe.
Right.
It's fun.
Yeah, and it's not like they're saying that this is the model that is correct. It's just you're saying, hey, it began with a cause, and there's certain sort of acausal things that they can point to. They can point to eternal universes. They can point to all kinds of things, which says that your hypothesis may not be right, that the universe had a cause. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just to throw another hypothesis out there based on this model, we're aware that our universe has a matter-antimatter asymmetry. It's a very, very slight, but there is one, which is why there's matter in our universe. If there were some kind of event in a parent universe where the matter and antimatter were locally roughly even, but unevenly distributed, and some kind of collision, perhaps an annihilation between the matter and antimatter, resulted in pockets of space-time, little bit more matter on this side, little bit more antimatter on this side, and now you've got 2 separated instantiations of space-time with a slight asymmetry each, even though it was balanced in the overall parent universe.
Yep.
It's also fun.
Contradicts the second law of thermodynamics. That's why you've got to have the arrows pointing in both directions if you want to hope for this model to be realistic. But if you have a double-headed arrow of time in both directions, then you've got a beginning of time and of the universe. So I want to co-opt Dr. Carroll's model for myself. On his model of the universe began to exist along with time. I also pointed out that on the Borguth-Vilenkin theorem, there are no classical models that succeed in showing the universe to be beginningless. And he rightly points out this is just classical spacetime. But then I've never heard really a response to my claim that if there is a quantum gravity era prior to the Planck time, that it would have to be itself finite, because otherwise it becomes inexplicable why classical spacetime only came into being 13 billion years ago, rather than from eternity past. So I think we've got good evidence for the beginning of the universe from the expansion of the universe. As for thermodynamics, here I argued that in order to explain why we are in a low entropy state, the standard answer is the universe began relatively recently with its low entropy condition at the beginning. By contrast, his model, I charged, violates the unitarity of quantum physics. He says no, because I'm not using the same mechanisms as Hawking, but then I pointed out that the mechanisms that he appeals to are both conjectural and actually incompatible with the universe described by the Borguth-Vilenkin theorem, as Christopher Weaver points out in his critique of the model. Secondly, the Boltzmann brain problem, I don't think...
So his problem with Carroll's model is that it conflicts with Borguth-Vilenkin, which Craig himself thinks is an invalid model.
Right.
So if I'm following the not logic Craig is putting out, Craig is mad at Carroll because Carroll's model works. Craig doesn't have a complaint against it.
Well, I think he's sort of doing a he's trying to say, hey, Sean Carroll's model conflicts with the most popular model, the Board Guth Blanken model, right? So he's trying to say, hey, it can't be possible because it conflicts with the most popular one. But just because Board Guth Blanken is the most popular one, it's not theory, right? It's not like Sean Carroll saying, hey, you know, my model disagrees with evolutionary theory or you know, sort of theory of gravity or something like that, you know, something we know to be true. It just is an alternate hypothesis that just doesn't happen to be the most popular. It's kind of like this, it's kind of like an appeal to popularity, but he's kind of smuggling it in there, trying to say, hey, well, Board Guth Blanken is the definitive theory, and it conflicts with that. Well, who cares? It's just a hypothesis. Like, who like what? Why do we have to care about that?
Yeah, as Carroll pointed out, he made no bones about addressing his own hypothesis because he knew Craig would bring it up, but he made it very, very clear that his hypothesis, along with all the others, are at this point completely unfalsifiable. They're not actually science because we cannot test them where we are right now. So it doesn't actually matter.
And I think Sean Carroll's problem is there is a lot of Board Guth Blanken, it only applies to classical space-time. I think that's his point, that there's a lot of these laws of physics that when you apply them to quantum states, they just don't hold, right? The whole idea of acausal interactions, and even, you know, sort of quantum entanglement, spooky actions at a distance. Classical physics says nothing can travel faster than the speed of light. But when you get into quantum states and quantum entanglement, it completely violates that principle, that information can travel faster than the speed of light. So, you know,
we can
you have all these...
observe it.
Yeah.
After purple, my second favorite color is 420 nanometers because that's the wavelength of Cherenkov radiation, which is produced by nuclear reactors that are underwater. I mean, they kind of have to be both to stop the radiation and also to gather the heat in order to turn the turbines and all that stuff. But the thing of it is, the speed of light through water is much, much slower than it is through a vacuum. So the neutrons that get emitted by the nuclear reactor are moving faster than the local speed of light. And as a result, they emit Cherenkov radiation.
Well, I remember seeing a thing where they compared they had a song that they transmitted to a receiver, and they compared sort of fiber optic transmission, which is the speed of light, versus quantum entangled particles. And quantum entangled particles had a lower latency. They just instantly transmitted the data. And we don't know, this is the thing, this is the brilliant thing. We don't know how they do it. We've got no idea. Like, there's a few hypotheses out there, but we don't really know why. And so there's all these sort of principles. I guess I'm just getting it. There's all these principles that we apply to classical physics that don't work for quantum physics, especially sort of quantum gravity and things like that. Like, they're just almost thrown out the window when it comes to that kind of stuff, which is part of the problem.
Oh yeah, we're still discovering new stuff. I hadn't heard about that particular experiment. It sounds very fascinating.
Yeah, I can look it up.
But just earlier this week, there was a news report about the possibility that we may have discovered a fifth fundamental force, where it's still shaky, but we detected some what is it, MAOs? It's super tiny particles, the result of our big atom smashers, if you will. But one of these super, super small particles, something was tugging on it and making it behave in a unexpected way, in a similar fashion to how electromagnetism can tug charged particles around. So they're hypothesizing, and it's still only at the hypothesis stage, but they're hypothesizing there may be another kind of field that is so weak it only affects this little bitty stuff. But if there is such a thing, maybe it affects dark matter. Maybe it affects dark energy. If we can learn more about it, we might be able to understand a larger chunk of the universe. But the point is, we're still learning a lot about the quantum level.
Yeah, and that's why we're searching for a unified theory. That's what we're looking for. It's something to tie together classical physics with quantum mechanics. That's what we're after. And sort of so to say, hey, this theory that operates, this theorem, I should say, that this mathematical theorem that operates in classical physics, well, you're taking a big stretch to apply that to quantum interactions.
Yeah, I think it's a really big mistake for Craig to try to. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but it sounds like my neighbors are setting off all the fireworks.
That's fireworks. I thought it was somebody rattling a bin behind you or something. That's insane.
I mean, it's
What's
either
the occasion?
fireworks or their house is collapsing.
What's the occasion? It's not the 4th of July, I'm pretty certain.
No, it isn't. I don't know. Actually, you know what? It may not be the neighbors. I live just up the road from a racetrack, and occasionally they do fireworks shows.
Maybe.
But my window is on this side, so I'm hearing it coming from this direction. That might be.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
So
you know what?
they-
I've always been amazed at America's sort of, you can just go out and buy fireworks and set them off everywhere and stuff. That's insane to me. It's just insane. Like,
we're
just
going
let
for Darwin
people
Awards.
just let people from a country that is undereducated have access to explosives. Sure, why not?
Mm-hmm.
What could possibly go wrong? You know what? I think mostly it's because in Australia, if you set off fireworks, you'll inevitably light something on fire, and the entire country wouldn't stop burning, essentially. So, you know.
Oh yeah, that happens here too. That's why half of the continent is on fire and has been for the past several years. It's
Jackson Rose said it's what our founding fathers wanted. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they did.
Yes.
Pretty sure they did. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Big holiday in Antarctica. I don't know. It might be like the last race of the year or something. I have no frickin' idea. It's anyway, let's continue.
Dr. Carroll has really come to grips with this, quite honestly. There are at least 2 reasons why Boltzmann brains would dominate. First, because on his multiverse model, in the long run, every baby universe becomes a de Sitter space and will be dominated by Boltzmann brains. Secondly, because in all of the other worlds that are not fine-tuned, there just aren't any ordinary observers, but there will be thermal fluctuations that produce Boltzmann brains. And so he...
No. You can't just go asserting Boltzmann brains all over. Okay, you're getting citation needed for that one. Because you can't just go, oh, if we don't... have a universe full of observers, it will inevitably create random brain. No.
That's not how Boltzmann brains work.
I mean, we don't even...
You can just have empty universes. You realize that, don't you? With no Boltzmann brains at all. I don't... What the hell? I don't even know what he's talking about.
Yeah. I don't know. Just yeah, it's true that there's more places where fireworks are illegal or restricted. Like here where I live, you can buy fireworks in the 2 weeks leading up to the 4th of July, but the rest of the year you have to go to a different state to buy them. But if you're going to put on a proper fireworks show, you have to get licenses and permits and things. But if you have the money, you absolutely can. So, It's fun that way. All right.
Let me guess, they're legal in Florida. I'm going to guess that.
I bet they are. Yep.
Yeah.
He's the one who has to justify some non-standard measure of probability in order to explain why ordinary observers like us should exist rather than Boltzmann brains. Then I appealed to the Wall theorem to show that even on a quantum gravity theory...
In the Boltzmann brain universe, they're using sentient apes to be their absurd argument against the possibility of design.
You've got to show in some weird universe, apes evolved into thinking sentient beings who put out philosophical statements. was obviously God that put all these Boltzmann brains everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to avoid the beginning of the universe. Dr. Carroll may have responded to this, but if he did, it went by so quick I didn't hear it. So it seems to be we've still got the Wall theorem showing that the quantum, even in quantum gravity, there has to be a beginning. As to the teleological argument from fine-tuning, he seems to have rested his entire case here on the fact that entropy would be way, way unnecessarily too small on theism. But I gave two responses to that. There may be life throughout the universe, not just us. And secondly, as Robin has pointed out, the low fine entropy condition is suitable for the discoverability of the universe. By contrast, on his view, it is incomprehensibly improbable that we should exist, given the equilibrium or the heat death state at which the universe would more probably exist. So, in sum, it seems to me that on balance, we've got good evidence, both that the universe began to exist and that therefore there must be a creator that brought it into being, and moreover, this is a personal designer of the universe in view of the fine-tuning of the universe for intelligent interactive agents like ourselves.
No.
Non sequitur alert. Hello?
Where's my... Oh, I need to go to the actual chat to get to my no. Where is it? There we go. No.
Non sequitur alert.
Okay, first of all, making arguments. It's not even arguments. He's asserting it's more probable his way. That is so far removed from evidence as. What is he freaking thinking?
And plus, he said that he wasn't putting forth this as a theory. I believe he's talking about a hypothesis. But obviously, he's changed gear again. He's shifted up into, yes, this is evidence for my hypothesis. Well, it's either a hypothesis or it's not. And if it's not, we can just ignore it. Like, what are you doing here? It's kind of like he's sallying from his Mott and Bailey, right? He's got his really defensible position, which is like, I'm not saying there's a scientific evidence for this. I'm just saying, hey, there's this thing here. And then he's sallying forth and going, oh, well, all of this evidence supports it, so you should believe it. But sort of when he pushed, he'll probably retreat back into that Bailey and say, well, I'm not trying to contend with science or, show this scientifically.
I know, but I have evidence. But I'm not asserting anything. But I have evidence.
Right.
For fuck's sake, Bill.
Yeah. It's like he wants to sort of play in the big boys' pool, but he doesn't want to get wet, kind of thing. Like he doesn't want to be held up to that scientific standard of, well, you've got to have rigorous, robust evidence. But he wants to be considered to have that level of evidence. So he's trying to say, hey, I've got all this evidence to show it, but don't actually hold me to it because I'm not making a scientific statement, which is bad, which is really bad.
I wonder if this is like early in his career, because I noticed that when the time bar isn't in the way, it says under his name, Talbot School of Theology, which is not where the debate is being held. Yes. I know he works with Biola now and has for quite some time. So I wonder if this was, I don't know, maybe not early in his career, but earlier in his career.
Oh, it could have been. I mean, he's certainly looking a lot more weathered now, but let's have a look. When was this debate from? I don't even know, to be honest with you. I think, didn't we say it was like 20 years ago or something? It was quite old, right?
I think so. I can't remember the exact year offhand either. Carroll versus Craig. Oh, thanks, Google. It's bringing up a link to this debate review, which is handy, but not what I'm looking for right now.
2014.
9 years ago, that's all?
Yeah, that's all.
Wow.
Yeah. That's quite a time. Like, that's quite a fair amount of time.
Oh, true.
9 years is a fair amount of time.
We've gone through several apocalypses since then. Well, I suppose I should say catastrophes, because apocalypse is a Greek word with a specific meaning, but I've been hanging out with the Bible study crowd too much.
Yeah. 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 I don't know. I've got to look at end of the world stuff. I think it's fascinating. Somebody pointed me to some guy that's pointed out, like, predicted the end of the world like hundreds of times, like he does it every single week, and you can't help but feel like, well, one of these times he's going to be right. Like he's just, if you call it enough, it's going to be right eventually, or else you'll die and you won't care anymore. So,
A stopped clock is right twice a day, but a clock running at just the right slowness is never right. It always manages to stay at not the correct time. Oh boy.
That's
All right,
fair.
I think he's just about done with his closing. Hopefully. I mean that smug look on his face, I think he thinks he's finished. So we'll see.
Yeah. Well, he did pretty well for a philosopher. Like, granted, he's a philosopher talking about cosmology and physics and stuff. He's done pretty well for someone with no background in physics or cosmology kind of thing, astronomy. So give him credit. He definitely raised some objections. I think that somebody who's more proficient in the field, i.e. Sean Carroll, is going to absolutely decimate him. But, he is a philosopher, not a cosmologist.
Yeah. I mean, it's not to any way imply that his case was good from a physics perspective, but he definitely did do some homework for this, like his familiarity
Right.
with a few of the different models and things, even apparently memorizing which slides are where, because he asked for one specific slide number. They brought one up and he said, no, that's 34, the one before that. Like, he had the slides memorized.
Well, but see, thing is, I've written presentations for debates, and if I've written it, I know where the slides are, and in any debate that I've written up, like that's not unusual in the slightest. So at least he's doing his own slides, I guess.
Maybe, I don't know. All right,
Yeah.
Closing statement 2. Carroll should go a little bit faster because we're going to have a fewer interruptions, I think.
All right, congratulations to everyone for having made it this far. I will confess a bit of frustration in this final talk because I think that almost everything that Dr. Craig said in his last talk, he had already said, and I tried to give my best response to it. They weren't always matched. So I'm going to take advantage of that to do something bizarre and unpredictable, which I'll get to in a second. First, I want to notice some of the things he did say. He said he was astonished that I refused to accept the fact that things need causes to happen, to which I can only quote David Lewis. I do not know how to refute an incredulous stare. I tried to give the reason why the causation analysis that we use for objects within the universe does not apply to the universe, but that more or less whizzed on by. Dr. Craig gets a lot of mileage out of the presumed nuttiness of things just popping into existence. Why don't bicycles just pop into existence? Again, I tried to explain what makes the universe different, but more importantly, the phrase popping into existence is not the right one to use when you're talking about the universe. It sounds as if it's something that happens in time, but that's not the right way to do it because there is no before the beginning, if there is a beginning. The correct thing to say is there was a first moment of time. When you say it that way, it doesn't sound so implausible. The question is there a model in which that's true? Do the equations of the model hang together? Does the model fit the data? And we have plausibly positive answers to all of those. He spends a lot of time on my own model, more time than I would have spent on it. He is upset that I did not include an arrow at the bottom in my axis on the compared to the graph when I drew the graph previously. I don't care about that, to be very honest. The double arrows here are just to express the fact that there's no intrinsic arrow of time. The arrow of time that we experience is because of the behavior of matter in the universe, the entropy increasing. And he says that's in violation of the second law of thermodynamics. Yes, it is an explanation of the second law of thermodynamics. This is the reason why we, in our little part of the universe, observe the second law. He mentions once again Boltzmann brain.
Yeah, that's an important. It's there's a proper name for the thing, but it's colloquially it's a cart before the horse fallacy. He's saying you can't do this because of thermodynamics, but it's because of thermodynamics that what we observe is happening, and we see this in many different ways throughout the universe. It's not just a good idea, it's the law. But really though, for all intents and purposes, what seems to be driving our perception of what the present moment is, what is driving time forward, is the entropic decay of the universe. It's the total energy level gradually winding down. And that it may not be a cause-effect relationship. We don't know enough yet to be sure, but they are definitely linked at the hip.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's fun that way.
And he says that there should be more Boltzmann brains than ordinary observers. I again explain why that's not true because it's a model-dependent statement. In this particular model, it turns out to be easier to make a universe than to make a brain. That's a selling point of the model. So with that under our belts, I want to actually just completely go off the topic and talk about issues beyond naturalism and theism.
And the reason why is because to make a brain, you've got to make a universe to house the brain, and then you've got to make the brain. So it's easier to make a universe than it is to make a brain. It's not rocket science. Craig.
as they say.
It's not that hard to understand.
Yeah, as Carl Sagan once put it, if you wish to bake an apple pie from scratch, you must first begin a universe.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Sagan. He will be missed.
Absolutely. I heard one of the Songify remixes of one of his not really a speech, it was an episode of his show Cosmos.
Sure,
But
yeah.
the way he presented it came off kind of inspirational like a speech. It was a thing he said about how if we don't destroy ourselves, we will eventually, inevitably go out to the stars. And somebody just remixed that into a song, and they put that apple pie from scratch line in there as like just a random verse.
I loved the way Sagan talked. His ideas of sort of science being sort of the candle in the dark kind of thing, illuminating, but only like small amount. He used these wonderful analogies and wonderful descriptions to sort of say, hey, and such an optimistic view. I think he was lovely because of his optimistic view on humanity and what we could accomplish, and his love of using your imagination to see where that will take us. I think that was amazing. What a guy! Yeah, Sagan was awesome, absolutely awesome.
Yeah, soul of a poet, brain of an astrophysicist.
Yep.
We're having a discussion here about God and cosmology, but let's pull back the curtain a little bit. There are very few people in the modern world who become religious, who come to believe in God because it provides the best cosmology, or because it provides the best physics, or biology, or psychology, or anything like that. And that
And
includes
just a second, that includes William Lane Craig, because he admitted that he didn't get convinced by the Kalam. He didn't get convinced by the teleological argument, the fine-tuning argument. That's not what convinced him. That's the arguments he makes, but that isn't what convinced him. Do you remember the argument that convinced him, that he said convinced him?
Shoot. I remember him saying in the debate with Hitchens that even if you threw out all of the arguments, it was the internal testimony of the Holy Spirit that kept him believing. But I'm not sure what originally convinced him.
Pascal's wager.
Oh, that's right. That's why he made that whole thing about how he had to lower the bar to the floor.
Yes. That was the whole point. It was because Pascal's wager, I might as well believe. So, and that coupled with pragmatism, basically, it was in his best interest to believe. So Pascal's wager, like the pragmatic being the not only what he gets as a reward after this life, but also what he gets in this life kind of thing. Sort of talking about how religious people are generally better mental health and better this and better that kind of thing, and all of the benefits. But, Pascal's wager. So, if in a level playing field, I might as well believe because I get all these benefits, and that's where the pragmatism comes in. So that's what he basically said. So he makes these philosophical arguments, but that's not what convinced William Lane Craig. It was Pascal's wager. So, with all things being equal, why not believe? Because you don't lose anything by not believing, and you have a lot to gain by believing. I think it's a terrible argument. I think it's absolutely horrible, but that's just me.
Yeah, no. As a philosopher, a man of logic, he should understand himself that Pascal's wager is actually a rather bad wager when you remove the false dichotomy of Christianity or atheism and factor in all the other possibilities. If you truly believe in Pascal's wager as a legitimate reason for believing something, as if you can choose what you believe anyway, then you should believe in the God with the scariest hell, because then even if you're wrong, you only end up in the second scariest hell.
Right. Well, that's not the only reason. It's also because when you say, hey, there's nothing to lose by believing in something, there's also like what is your integrity worth? What is your dedication to honesty worth? If you're just going to believe something because it gains you things, aren't you giving up your scientific and intellectual integrity in order to just have material or immaterial spiritual gain, I guess, which I like you may think your integrity is worthless. I happen to value mine quite highly, so I don't see it as a well. There's no cost, as well as what's it going to cost humanity to believe in something if it is untrue. It may cost us a great deal. So there's all these objections, and it's not a very strong argument. Which and this is the thing about William Lake. It blew me away when he said that, and also that's that famous statement. Well, if the bar for evidence is too high, just lower the bar. And excuse me,
just for Christianity though. Oh,
Yeah.
there's another thing too. What I said about the scariest God, that runs into. I'm always confusing which way the things go, but I believe it's called the problem of induction, because that's only the gods we've imagined. There very well could be an even scarier God we've never thought of.
Right.
So we just don't know. And as I
Yes.
keep saying, until we have a good reason to think any of those might be the case, there's not a lot of point in going after any of them.
Right.
Jock mentions Anselm's ontological argument. That's the I can imagine the greatest possible being, and the next thing greater than that would be if it really existed. That's a weird one. I never understood why that caught on so much. Maybe I'm just not philosophy-minded enough. The flaws seem like super obvious to me. Like if you can define something into existence, if you can imagine it by definition into being, then you hit absurdity really, really quick, because you can imagine the greatest possible pizza and the mightiest possible aliens and so forth.
Well, I think it was Hegel that covered it with his perfect island. Like, so if you imagine a perfect island, one with, all these coconuts and the perfect amount of sand and the perfect consistency, so the perfect sea, you can envisage that, but an even more perfect island would be one that actually existed and had all those quantities as well. But that island doesn't actually exist. So, it sort of shows that you can do this. And like you said, pizza, and you can do this with anything, like literally anything. I think it was Hegel that said that. I'm not 100% sure, though. Someone correct me if I'm wrong.
It might be. I'm gonna look it up, because now it's gonna bug me. Let's try Hegel Island and see.
I'm probably wrong.
Heligoland. The islands are located in the Heligoland Bight, part of the German Bight, in the southeastern corner of the North Sea. So that was the wrong thing for me to look for.
No, it was Gonilo. Gonilo of Marmotol.
He has powerful pizza. Hegel had the knockwurst argument, not pizza. Oh, yay.
Oh, yes. Hegel's Oktoberfest argument, I remember. Yeah.
Endless fun. But yeah, I can't imagine that anybody has ever been convinced by that particular argument. It's almost a borderline conspiracy theory argument. Like, they don't want you to know this, but sort of like the people who say the 7-day week, just to pull out a random example like that.
That's
that proves
nonsense.
Genesis. Never mind that 7-day week has days that, by the same logic, prove Thor, Odin, and Freya exist. So let's set that aside for a moment.
Oh, mate, I've even heard like our years are in AD, Anno Domini, year of our Lord. So therefore Christianity is true. And it's like, I'm sorry, could you possibly find a worse argument? Like, possibly. It's just incredible.
That actually, the regular recorded video I released earlier today, it's Isaiah Saldivar, and he's he has 7 reasons Christianity is not just true, but the only
Oh.
true religion, and that's one of his 7 arguments.
Oh no!
I'm
Oh,
like,
that's
my
horrible.
dude, like we're
Oh,
not even dealing with low-hanging fruit. We're picking up
yeah,
the
that's
half-rotten fruit off the ground.
Yep.
Easily
Yeah,
the funniest fucking video I've ever done so far. Because his arguments are
Wow.
just, they're all like that.
Yep.
Ay, ay, ay. All right, let's let Carroll go a little more.
Famous quote by him that says that the real reason, the primary reason for believing in Christianity isn't cosmological arguments. And I'm not mentioning this as a criticism. It is simply an observation of fact. There are other reasons to be a theist other than cosmology. I think that is true. I think that makes sense. Most people who become religious do so for other reasons, because it gives them a sense of community, a sense of connection with the transcendent. It provides meaning or fellowship in their lives. The problem is that the basis of religion in the modern Western world is theism, belief in the existence of God. And I've tried to make the case that science undermines theism pretty devastatingly. 500 years ago, it would make perfect sense to be a theist. I would have been a theist 500 years ago. By 200 years ago, science had progressed to the point where it was no longer the best theory. By 100 years ago,
better
after
be a
Darwin, it was a
theist
route. But these
200
days,
years ago.
Uh-huh.
You
Yeah.
better be a theist, Sean Carroll. Or if
Remember
not,
what
because
happened
we've
to
got
Galileo and Bruno
Yeah.
and even Copernicus had to hide his book until he died
Yep.
for fear of what might happen to him.
Yeah, you better be a theist, son. Like, atheists had a pretty hard time back 200, 300 years ago.
Mm-hmm. And that's a thing that people make a big stink out of. Like, oh, all the Christians back during the scientific revolution, all the scientists were Christian. Well, all the scientists said they
Everyone.
were Christian, so you didn't burn
Yeah.
them, but you don't really know, do you?
Hmm. And everyone was Christian back then, because like anybody that was, I mean, even if you weren't the right type of Christian, you were still burnt at the stake and destroyed. Like, let's look at the Cathars, who sort of believed in equality for men and women and had this very humanistic streak to them. They were still Christian. They were destroyed by the church for having heretical views.
Mhm.
Like, the whole idea that Christianity wasn't spread by the sword is nonsense. It's just nonsense. Like, you have inquisitions, you have this sort of declaring people heretical sects and weeding them out kind of thing. Anything that strays too far from the church. Yeah. I don't know.
Yep.
with modern cosmology, there's no longer any reason to take that as your fundamental worldview. So what do you do if you identify as a member of a religious tradition in this situation? I think there are three options. One is to deny the science, to think that the world is 6,000 years old. Happily, nobody up here on stage today takes that attitude. That was a previous debate from a couple weeks ago. But there's a second attitude, which is to accept.
I kind of want to look up that debate now.
Yeah. What was that on here, or did Sean Carroll debate the world is 6,000? Because I would watch that, like him trying to debate 6,000 years old.
Yeah,
What
I don't
the
think
hell?
it'd be on Craig's channel, Reasonable Faith, but
Yeah.
yeah, maybe there's a recording of it somewhere. That could be very, very interesting.
The science, but deny the implications. To say that none of the progress of modern science has in any way altered the fundamental view of reality that we put together 2,000 years ago. And I think that there's two reasons why that's not a good idea. Number one, I think it's wrong, as I tried to explain throughout the debate. But number two, I think it's a strategic mistake. I think that if one believes in theism, that must be central to one's view of the world for many, many other reasons. And because theism has been undermined by science, it takes theists and it marginalizes them as part of the wider intellectual conversation. Humanity is at a crossroads. It's a very important time in the history of the world. We need to have deep discussions about who we are and where we're going. And people who cling to the belief in God after science has undermined it are increasingly not going to be part of that discussion. Here's we talked about cosmologists and physicists. Here's what philosophers believe. There's a recent survey that asked philosophers 30 big questions. And philosophers don't agree on anything, but here are the three questions they have the greatest amount of consensus on. External reality exists, science tells us something about that external reality, and God does not exist. Now again, philosophers get three philosophers in a room. They don't even agree that there are three philosophers in the room. So the fact that there's only 73% is still very impressive, and this includes professional philosophers of religion. So I claim that there is a third option, and here's the point where I start giving people advice who did not ask me for any advice. So I ask your indulgence here. The third option, as I see it, for the person who is religious is to say, look, we admit we were wrong. We were wrong hundreds of years ago when we based our belief system on the idea that God was in charge of it all. Of course we were wrong. It was 2,000 years ago. We didn't have microscopes or telescopes. What right do we have to think that we would have gotten the fundamental nature of reality right?
And in fact, we're probably still wrong today. We're just a little closer than we were back then.
Yep.
Future humans will look back at us and go, oh, you dumb, half-naked apes.
But, this person could hypothetically say, religion is much more than theism. It's not just the belief in God. There is the fellowship we feel for our human beings. For centuries, religious Traditions were the place where human beings did their most careful, sustained, and rigorous contemplation about what it means to be human, about what it means to experience joy or suffering, to feel camaraderie with your fellow man, to be charitable, and so forth, to have meaning and purpose in your lives. So maybe this person could say there's something to be learned even for naturalists from the outcome of all that contemplation. Maybe there is wisdom in scriptures, in the Sermon on the Mount, in the art and the music and the lives of the saints, or for that matter, in the Bhagavad Gita or the Tao Te Ching. I don't know whether there is wisdom there. I'm asking for guidance. At the end of the day, we are all human beings trying to figure out our way in this confusing world. The point is that naturalism replaces theism, but it doesn't replace religion. It doesn't necessarily provide answers to the hard questions of meaning and fulfillment and purpose. I think that it can. I find naturalism personally to be an inspirational and profound view of the world. Ironically, the part I find most inspirational is the fact that someday I will die. Everyone in this room will someday be dead, and there will not be an afterlife, a continuance of judgment. The lives we lead now are not dress rehearsals. They are the only performance we have. Therefore, what matters is what is here, the people we know and love, the lives we can change, the good we can do for the world. That is all there is, so of course, that is what matters. Another way of putting it is, naturalism has addressed the easy questions, the basic physical features of how the world works. But there are hard questions of meaning and purpose and fulfillment yet to be answered. The way I like to say is, we have picked the low-hanging fruit off of the tree of knowledge. But there's a lot of succulent goodies up there on the higher branches, and we'll get there faster if we all climb together. Thank you.
That's a
that's
damn
odd.
strong finish.
Yeah, well, he kind of did an Uno. I'm going to add the Uno reverse there, because he went into sort of philosophy and morality there, sort of what we ought to do, right? So he kind of did an Uno reverse on Craig, who's kind of trying to say, hey, science says this, science says that, and he kind of just went into the morality of science, like sort of, so the philosophy of science. And I know that Sean Carroll was heavily involved in philosophy of science, like he definitely was. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what he was going for. Is he's like, oh, Craig, you want to swim in my pool? I'm not only going to win here, I'm going to take over yours too.
Yeah,
because like that's, I don't know. I've heard a few people wax eloquent and emotional and inspirational about humanism and naturalism and so forth. But that was definitely leaning hard into the idea that naturalism can do more than just explain the what, but can also, if we work towards it, help us answer the whys. They'll just take more work.
I mean, the old adage is like science, it's all about the coulda, not the shoulda kind of thing, right? So science can give you nuclear fission, but it can't tell you whether to make a bomb or a power plant with it, kind of thing. That is really what he's talking about. But he's kind of saying, well, naturalism, it can tell you that. So simply the sort of the idea that you're looking for meaning in your life, naturalism can provide that, which, of course, naturalism isn't science. It's sort of just accepting the world as it is in its natural state. So
it's
I don't
more
disagree
of a philosophy.
Yeah, correct,
and
yes.
Good night, Jacques.
It absolutely is.
Good having you hang out.
Good night, Jacques.
Yeah. All right, so now we've got the Q&A portion, and this is where things, it's less significant for the debate, but things could get fun.
Yeah,
we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
Let's give them both another hand.
Come on, don't milk the applause too much, buddy.
This was just amazing, and the one thing I'm amazed by is that there are great disagreements about time, but both of them stayed on time. And so thanks, guys. And come on up.
Moderators got jokes.
Yep. But
to the podium.
Yes. Oh, I have a thing for where I'll learn where all my buttons are sooner or later. There it is. Jokes for days. I need to add more sound effects. I'm gradually working on the various tricks I can pull, but it's I need to work on my videos more, so it's when I can spare time.
Yeah.
Podiums. Let me explain how this is going to work, and I need to get my notes here. My wife gets very nervous when it's just my stream of consciousness working. We have a microphone in each aisle for questions. The aisle over here on Sean's side is for questions for Sean Carroll. The aisle over here by Bill's side is for questions for Bill Craig. And we're going to alternate from one to the other, and we'll have an even number of questions. All right? When a question is asked to Sean will have 2 minutes to answer, and if Bill wants to respond, he'll have up to 1 minute. And vice versa. When a question is asked to Bill, he has up to 2 minutes to answer, and Sean has up to 1 minute. And then let me give some instructions to those who are asking questions. Number one, state your question in a hurry, like 20 seconds, okay? Number two, make sure that it's a real question. The way to make sure that you're asking real questions is ask yourself a question. Ask yourself this question. Was I paid to come here? Exactly. If you were not paid to come here, then you are welcome to ask a question, but you are not invited to lecture. So make sure it's a real question. Second, ask yourself this question. Will everyone benefit from hearing this question? Is it a question that's going to shed light, to get at more truth? Is it more akin to some interesting thoughts you had one night after your third highball?
I think I may come back later and write down what he's saying. I change it a little bit, remove some of the less great jokes in there, but the principles could be really, really useful for streamlining. Like I'm thinking of modern day debate where half of the questions are gotchas from the chat members and they're not legitimate questions at all, and it's frustrating because it wastes time. On the plus side, though, because in that platform the questions come in the form of super chats, they're limited by character, so a person can't lecture for 2 minutes about, preamble. They have to just get to their statement, question, whatever it was.
Yeah.
You've heard it said there is no such thing as a stupid question. That's not true. That's a stupid saying. And my last instruction would be, you only get one question. When you ask your question, step away from the microphone. No follow-ups, unless Sean or Bill ask you for, if they don't understand what you're asking, they ask you a question, then you can clarify it. So we can get more questions in, and everyone will be happier. So come to the microphones now, and we will begin.
I think I agree with him on that, but I think there's no such thing as a question that doesn't increase knowledge. How about that?
Maybe.
So even if it is a stupid question, you can always go, well, now I understand what a stupid question can really rise to the level of. You still gain knowledge from it.
Yeah. There's some questions that are incoherent, but you can use those as an opportunity to explain why they're incoherent.
Right.
Yeah.
Every question is an opportunity, maybe. I don't know. But yeah, I kind of agree with him. Some questions are just stupid.
Yeah, well, I won't get into it. There've been a few questions over the years that just why? Like, what is the point? You're just taking up space.
Yeah. No, I gotcha.
Mm-hmm. One other thing. Here at the Greer Herd Forum, we follow Robert's rules. My name is Robert. I make the rules. So, all right.
Hey, Dr. Carroll, how are you doing? Thank you for being here tonight, sir. In your polemic tonight on theism, you said something like, look, if you have a fully explainable model, why do you keep looking for something else to add? Okay. Now, my question is something like this. If you took as a metaphor for the universe, say that we have a complete and entire physical explanation for the existence of the jet engine. We can talk about internal combustion, all the things that go into making it and so forth. But does that complete knowledge mean that Frank Will didn't exist? Does a fully accurate mathematical model make this so? My question is this exactly. Isn't this a category mistake to assume that it does? Namely, that law and mechanism does away with personal agency.
Great. This is being recorded. I need to repeat the question, right? So his question got onto the page. Okay. Yeah, so that's a very good question. And I think the answer is the universe is different than things inside the universe. As I try to explain, there's a reason why there are reasons why. There are reasons why in our everyday life it is perfectly correct to speak a language of causation and explanation and invention and creation. And when you look carefully at what those reasons are, they don't apply to the universe. The universe isn't part of a bigger structure in which there are patterns, evolution laws, arrows of time, expectations for what should happen. So a jet engine and the universe are just not very analogous to each other.
It seems to me that that's just fantastic to think that the universe could just come into being from non-being, that it just pops into existence. And as I said, if one says that that is possible, then you're confronted with the difficulty, why only universes? It seems to me then that everything and anything would come into being from nothing because there's nothing about nothing that could make it discriminate between universes and anything else. So it seems to me that this is a difference without a difference. I would say that the condition that applies to the universe that makes the causal principle relevant would be it's beginning to exist. If a horse begins to exist, there's got to be a cause for that. If a building begins to exist, there's got to be a cause for that. Similarly, if the universe...
Well, he's like doubling down on category errors. First of all, once you have a universe, you no longer have a state of nothing. Second, and this is a Ray comfort level argument he's making. If a horse begins to exist, the material that makes up the horse, all the atoms, they've all existed since, if not the Big Bang, then whatever star forged the elements from the Big Bang into those elements. Like, it's all the matter and all the energy have always existed. They're just getting rearranged into the
Yeah.
form of a horse. And
Yeah, so I'll sort
Craig
of
should know
point
that.
at the ship of Theseus. That if you change all the planks on the ship and it gets damaged over time, when does it stop becoming that ship? When is it a different ship? And the same is true for things beginning to exist. Like, so if you start to build a ship, at what point does that ship begin to exist? Is it when you chop the lumber? Is it when you assemble the hull? Is it when you add the mast? Like, when does that ship become the ship? If you forget the anchor and sail out, does that mean that you're not sailing on that ship, like because you forgot the anchor? If you forget the mast, does that mean it's not a ship? Like, how do we define these things? So what we don't have, like, when we say begin, it's more descriptive than it is an actual hard change of state kind of thing. But really, what you're saying is that things just change state. Nothing really truly begins to exist. Things just change state into something existing when it wasn't before. So, it's very, very tough to say, hey, this is, I mean, there's arguments over when life begins to exist, in the womb kind of thing. Like, we sort of say, hey, when does that person begin to exist? Do they begin to exist when they're an egg? Do they begin to exist when that egg is fertilized? Do they begin to exist when they have a brain? All of it's very not arbitrary, but it's certainly not as cut clear as he wants to say. So yeah, I don't know. I just love the ship of Theseus because it's just such a good exercise in what makes that thing a thing, and what's to say when it changes and isn't that thing anymore, or becomes that thing.
Yeah. Our is what makes Mark in the atoms that make up Mark, or is it an emergent property of the whole system? Like, can we change out Mark's atoms and still have a Mark? I think
Well, I was
so,
talking to
because
Bree the other
we do
day,
that.
and like we're talking about sort of the bacteria in your stomach, the biotic landscape that sort of allows you to have a healthy stomach kind of thing. Is that part of you? Is that something else? Like, because your system relies on it to digest properly and, keep your stomach stable. Is it part of you, or is it something else? And then you're sort of asking, well, is mitochondria part of you? Because it has a different DNA sequence. So there's all these questions, and it's sort of, to my mind, when you drill down to it, when you drill really down to it, and this is just what I believe, is that everything is just one thing, and we sort of give these separate properties, these separate parts of this one thing. We say, okay, that's a thing in itself, and we separate it kind of thing. But that's kind of, there's nothing to say that we're not still one thing. It's very, very weird. I kind of appeal to monism, because the human being is, formed of things that aren't that human. It's really odd.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah, we have a Gur
Oh
infestation.
no.
But yeah, like there's we get hung up on our own definitions rather a lot,
Right.
and it gets in our
Right.
own way. Like, as you mentioned, our cells are shoot, the term for it eludes me. My brain is too mushy, but it's a
What does it mean?
endopic capture situation kind of thing. The
Yeah.
mitochondria, they were separate organisms, but now
Mhm.
well, they couldn't survive on their own, but you might still consider them separate organisms. And same thing with chloroplasts on the plant side, or the nucleus of a cell and a bunch of other structures. It's separate things that work better together, and now we can call it a thing, one thing. It is a cell, even though it's a community of formerly independent life forms.
Yeah.
Likewise, multicellular organisms. Our consciousness doesn't exist in our cells. It's an emergent property of the whole system. And you
Yeah.
can expand that outward. I've heard many anthropologists refer to the behavior of societies as if they were an individual, and the principles of psychology can apply to that society as if it were an individual. Some will think one way, some will think another way. Eventually, a decision is made, and then action is taken. It's not
Yeah.
directly analogous, but we kind of have an over-organism that we're a part of in a different way, because we've reached the feasible limits of multicellularity, so now we're doing a multi-organism thing. And I think that's where things like Bree's idea about entire forests being considered a superorganism, they seem more likely, because we do see something resembling superorganism behavior. Bree also brought up hives, bees, ants, and things. They function as if they're one organism with many, many bodies. So yeah, the lines get blurry all over the place. And if we get too hung up on our own definitions, we're just going to confuse the fuck out of ourselves. All right, I think we've drifted off topic enough, because now I can't remember what the hell Craig was talking about.
I think Gur just dropped in while he's streaming, which is such a Gur thing to do.
It really is. He even said at the beginning of his stream that he's known for not even waiting for his own streams to end before he goes somewhere else. So he's just exploring that point. It happens.
Begins to exist, there needs to be a cause for that. And in that respect, the conditions for the causal principle do apply. Sorry, I'm over time.
Dr. Craig, what would you say to a Thomist, a follower of Thomas Aquinas, who says, I have good arguments for God, such as Aquinas' 5 ways, that are based on indubitable metaphysical principles? It would be imprudent to advance a theistic argument that rests, even partly, on modern science, since science can change, and if some theistic argument loses face as science changes, so does theism. Dr. Craig, what about this charge of imprudence from the Thomist?
Yes, I would say that Thomas Aquinas' own metaphysical principles are highly dubious and in doubt, and that therefore I have little confidence that his arguments are, as he claimed, demonstrations. Aquinas was familiar with the Kalam cosmological argument. This is a very ancient argument, and he was aware of the Muslim medieval thinkers who championed it. And Aquinas said, if the universe did begin to exist, then clearly there had to be a cause of the beginning and of motion. But he thought you couldn't prove with demonstrative certainty that the universe did begin to exist. Of course, they had none of the modern empirical evidence. But I'm persuaded, and I think Aquinas would agree, that the philosophical arguments for the beginning were good probability arguments, even if they weren't mathematical demonstrations. So I think Aquinas simply raised the bar too high for what constitutes a good argument for God's existence. We don't need to have certainty or mathematical demonstrability. All we need to do is to offer arguments that are logically valid, have true premises, and the premises are more plausibly true than not. And if that's right, then that's a good argument for the conclusion. And I think we've got such arguments today, and we shouldn't be preoccupied with Aquinas' concern for metaphysical or mathematical demonstration.
I'm in a weird position, because I agree with the first part of what Craig said. Aquinas should know better, and we honestly, as Craig himself said, an argument is not a demonstration. But then the second part of what Craig said, that all we really need is arguments, and they don't even have to be real. As long as they make sense to us, it doesn't matter if it matches reality.
No, that's not what he said. So he's talking about sort of validity and soundness here. That basically he's saying the arguments have to be valid, so they have to be logically consistent with, the laws of logic and the way that we think, which is fine. That's fine. Everybody knows that. But he's saying that the premises have to be true, or at least plausibly, probably true kind of thing. So what he's sort of saying is that they have to be sound or most likely sound kind of thing. But
I don't like that. I can get down with sound, because sound means that it is, if not true, to our best understanding, is true or probably true.
Right.
But this whole plausibly true thing, that's pushing it too far. I don't think you could categorize it as sound if it's only, well, it's not quite a 50-50, I have 51% probability. Like, no, that's not enough. If I had a ship that was 51% seaworthy, I wouldn't call it sound,
Yeah, I gotcha. So he's saying more likely to be true, but I also take exception with how he's working out these probabilities, that he seems to be sort of ascribing these probabilities, which he's got no way to tell whether a God universe or a non-God universe is more likely. I don't know how he's working that out, because it seems to be, again, resting on these priors that sort of the universe is a certain way. A multiverse doesn't exist. All of these priors seem to be assumptions. So if he's wrong about any of them, he can throw that more likely right out the window.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's almost an arbitrary, I've declared that it's more likely because
Yes.
I wanna.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yep, he's lowering the bar, even when he
Lower that bar.
doesn't say so. Got
Good
to
old
do the limbo.
William Limbo Craig.
I like that. Maybe I'll add a limbo graphic to my little attack bar here. I don't know. I'm waiting for him to beg the question so I can pop up that guy. Who's also an emoji, but yeah, a lot of my animations are, well, that's not really an animation. My pop-ups, let us say, are also emojis because I had them ready because they're emojis.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, let's hear if Carroll chooses to respond.
One of the architects of the Big Bang model was Georges Lemaitre, who was a Belgian physicist, mathematical physicist, MIT and Harvard graduate, and also a Jesuit priest. And later in life, in the 1950s, he was serving on a papal commission because the Pope at the time wanted to put forward a statement that said, look, the Big Bang, excellent evidence for the existence of God. And Lemaitre stopped him from doing that. He said, no, you can't get your the peanut butter of theology mixed up with the chocolate of science. It does not actually taste great together because, who knows, someday some smart ass will come up with a theory of the universe that is eternal and there isn't a Big Bang anymore. Dr. Craig and I are on the same side. We think that Lemaitre was wrong to make that kind of statement. We both believe that if you're going to be an intellectually honest theist, you need to accord with the best data from the universe. And as we both agree, science is not in the job of proving things with metaphysical certitude. It says that models get better and better at fitting the data. I think that works just as well for theism as it does for naturalism.
Dr. Carroll, thanks for being...
I disagree with Carroll on that one, insofar as I generally applaud Lemaitre for standing up to the Pope and saying, the Pope looks at the Big Bang theory and goes, look, that's Genesis. And Lemaitre goes, Your Holiness, no. This is not that. They superficially look similar. But if you go past the superficial, they are not. And if you go declaring that they are, then as soon as we start learning more and they start to diverge, you're putting yourself in a position where by papal decree, Genesis becomes fundamentally untrue. And that's not a good way to do things. So I agree with Lemaitre on that one.
Well, that's what Sean Carroll said, that Lemaitre said, you don't put the peanut butter of theology with the chocolate of science kind of thing. They have to be separated.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't I don't know. I do agree with him that theists have to work within science, because the ones that don't look very silly, like the young Earth creationist kind of thing, whenever they're sort of saying, "Hey, we reject this or we reject evolution," they come out looking really silly. So, yeah, I kind of agree with him on that. I think that William Lane Craig is one who works within the scientific models. I will at least give him that he's not a young Earth creationist or an anti-evolutionist or anything like that. I think that he works pretty broadly within scientific sort of, fields. So.
Yeah, he actually gets quite a bit of flack from the creationists for not being a creationist.
Why are you being mean to me, Azo?
Because he's an Azo.
Oh, man.
It's what Azos do. Oh my goodness. Yeah, you see, it's really, really silly that our planet's on fire. We're all gonna die very soon, and people are arguing over which invisible friend is real. Oh well.
Well, but things are changing. Like so theism is sort of very slowly ebbing away, and you've got to remember that a lot of the people that are in charge, they're not going to be in charge. Like the new generation that believes in theism is very small. It's very, very small, right? I think Azho's negging me. I think that's the correct term. So, like there's not, you've got to remember that in the future there's not going to be this sort of old white guy grip on religion and the government kind of thing. Things are going to change. It's just change happens slowly, unfortunately. Whether or not that'll be in time, I think it will be. I think that humanity will overcome, like so many other things, but we'll find out, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a rough ride, but it would really take a lot to make humans extinct, because we are, even though many of us are slow, lazy, don't wanna, etc., collectively we are really good at adapting.
Yeah.
The Bold and the Beautiful, that rings a bell, but
Soap.
yeah, it's what I
It's an
thought.
American soap, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Alrighty. Oh, that's why it's a
Oh,
semi pun reference. We're currently doing
so
The Bald and the Bearded.
so apparently Beansy's negging you, so we've both got our detractors in the audience just shouting stuff at us. So yeah,
We've got hecklers, Mark.
heckled us. See, this is why I made that banhammer. Damn it!
I know, and I'm so jealous. All my pretty emojis, but no hammers. Oof. Oh well. We did get the pirate flag recently, though, which is it's not the same, but I kind of enjoy it. Piracy. I'm gonna steal all your best arguments or something like that.
Right.
End of your first speech, you mentioned how, in a nutshell, the theist weasels his way out of predictions that he would make based on the evidence. My question is, though, coming at it, that seems to be assuming that naturalism is some sort of default position, and that theism is just adding one step on. My question would be that, do you not find that naturalism is a sort of a bent, an angle that you're coming at it, and that you allow nothing in that realm? I mean, granted, I know that's what naturalism is, but that you're so shut off from the beginning that nothing could ever meets the evidence, or like Lawrence Krauss says, even if it was in disguise, it may be considered.
That's right. Yeah, I think it's a good point. Personally, I think that there would be no problem for me to be persuaded out of naturalism. All right, the roof is not. But I think it's a matter of what is the model that best fits the data. Again, 500 years ago, I would have been a committed theist, because that was the best we could have done at the time. So I think that it is not an assumption. Some people try to sometimes say that science or naturalists start from an assumption of naturalism, so they just simply won't consider alternatives. I'm very happy to consider alternatives. I think that there were some phenomena in the world which really looked exactly like some religious tradition was saying should happen and was miraculous, was seemingly violating the laws of physics. What would scientists do in that situation? They would not say, oh, we're not allowed to think about this because we agreed yesterday at faculty tea that the world was a natural world. I think they would try to come up with the best explanation. If the best explanation is not naturalism, then I would buy that. I will say that naturalism seems to me to be a priori simpler than theism, because naturalism is a natural world, theism has a natural world and something else that I think is ill-defined. But I didn't actually use that. I think in a proper quantitative Bayesian probability analysis, my prior for naturalism is higher than my prior for theism, but overwhelming evidence will always take care of that. I just don't think it's there.
Yeah. So there's nothing saying that methodological naturalism or science, there's nothing saying that it can't lead to something supernatural. It's just that supernatural is defined out of the natural world. So but methodological naturalism basically says you have to start with like things in nature. It doesn't say that you can't get to a god through it. It's just that's never where it leads. That's the thing. So if there are sort of predictions made by theists, and they can predict these things way better, then that would be good evidence. But they can't, and they never do. So it's not science's fault.
Yeah, like it's like the old portrait painters, right? Like, it's not Daguerre's fault that his method of taking portraits is both faster and more accurate than the painting style. Like,
yeah,
that's what you do is lovely, but you can't keep up.
Both the naturalist and the theist can be stubbornly committed to their worldviews and not allow contrary evidence to overthrow it. Naturalists are just as adept as theists at explaining away evidence that they find inconvenient. I mean...
What?
I'm gonna say citation needed that one, because that
I mean,
it needs a citation.
We're aware that some evidence is stronger than others, right? We're aware that in courts, anecdotal evidence is really weak, while DNA evidence is really strong, right? We're aware of this, so I don't see how sort of and hearsay is the worst of all. You can't even do that in a court. So I'd love to see this strong evidence you're talking about, because the strong evidence that we talk about in a legal situation is the scientific evidence. Like, I'd love to see this evidence that you're talking about. Because arguments aren't evidence, right? You've got a lot of arguments. Maybe they are evidence. It's pretty weak evidence, especially if the basis of your arguments are slightly flawed.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just kind of boils the blood, because he's doing that tu quoque. Like, he doesn't have something to back up the assertion. He's just saying,
Right.
"Oh well, you do it too." But not really, though. No.
Yeah.
Even to the extent of asserting the universe popped into being out of nothing. So that's a charge that I think goes both ways. It would be possible to falsify theism, for example, by showing a contradiction.
This is getting downright deceptive at this point. Sean Carroll sort of corrected him on his position again and again and again. For you to bring it up now, Billy boy, that's pretty bad. That's pretty bad.
Yeah, it's downright Hovind-ish to have been told multiple times, no, that's not what we believe, and to continue to assert that's what people believe.
Yep. It's almost Hovind-esque, isn't it? Like that continued repeating of the straw man, even though you've been told, hey, that is not the correct position.
Mm.
In the concept of God, as some have sought to do, that there could not be, for example, an omniscient person or a timeless person or something of that sort. So that would be a means of falsifying theism if one could go that route.
Dr. Craig, I'd like to understand better the Kalam argument, because I'm struggling with it.
How do you show that there's not a timeless person?
He's asking for the prove a negative situation. He's saying,
right,
until you can prove the Earth is round, I'm going to go right on thinking that it's flat.
Well, it's worse than that, because he's sort of said, you have to prove the non-existence of a deity that can't be detected by any ordinary means.
Yeah, you can't prove my invisible dragon isn't there. Oh, shoot, what was that quote? Something like, physics is looking for a black cat in a dark room. Metaphysics is looking for a black cat in a dark room that isn't there. And theology is looking for a black cat in a dark room that isn't there and declaring, I found it.
Yeah.
Prove I didn't.
You're stating that the universe has a beginning, and then you invoke cause and effect. The cause and effect is a temporal concept. So if there's no time, it's a temporal concept. It makes sense if time exists. But before the universe, there's no time. And considerably, why would you need a cause when the concept of cause and effect does not make really any sense?
Now, when you say that cause and effect are temporal concepts, what do you mean by that?
Well, that you have the cause has always to precede or be
that's what I thought
instantaneous with an effect.
So I don't think that's true. I don't think that's at all true. And don't you think that causes and effects can be simultaneous?
And if they are, then God and the universe come into being at the same time, and then why would you need God to explain the birth of the universe?
Okay, so you are willing to grant that causes and their effects can be simultaneous, right?
Sure.
Okay, yes, I think that's evident. So what I would say is that God's creation of the universe is simultaneous with the universe coming into being. And what could be more obvious than that when you think about it? When else would it come into being than at the moment that God created it? So my own studied view of God's relationship to time, which is a terribly interesting subject, is that God is timeless without creation, and he is in time from the moment of creation on. The exercise of causal power by which God brings the universe into being marks God's entrance, as it were, into time in virtue of his causal relationship with the effect that he brings about. So I don't think causes do need to precede their effects temporally. They can be simultaneous with them. And in the case of creation, I would say the universe comes into being at t equals 0, and that is the same moment at which God causes the universe to come into being.
There's a few problems with that.
Yeah.
But to keep it relatively simple, that entirely borks Craig's typical
causality. Yep.
Ping, 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 multiple points thing that God has to be. The very first one he always lists is timeless.
Mm-hmm.
If
Spaceless.
God enters into time, which is the only way he can make this aspect of the argument work, then he is no longer timeless.
Yes.
So he's
timeless
created himself
thing's
a paradox.
always made no sense to me, because how can something act if it is timeless? And anything that he can apply to God, well, Sean Carroll could just say, well, then the universe, the time starting in the universe that already existed eternally because there is no time before that point, is just simultaneous. Like it was simultaneous with the effect. He really has opened himself up for a real shellacking. I think he's going to cop it from Sean Carroll over this one.
Yeah, he may get a good old blast. We'll see how it goes.
I'm pretty sure nobody cares about my opinion about God's atemporality, so I will use this as an excuse to reiterate my objection to the language of coming into existence or popping into existence. That is not what the universe does, even in models where the universe has a beginning, a first moment. Because the verb, popping, the verb to pop, has a temporal connotation, is the word I'm looking for. It sounds as if you waited a while and then pop, there was the universe. But that's exactly wrong. The correct statement is that there are models that are complete and consistent, in which there's a first moment of time. That is not the same as to say that there was some process by which the universe popped into being. That's yet another difference between the universe and things inside the universe.
Dr. Carroll, you said in
Well, it's a fair point, but I wish he would have shotgunned Craig at point blank with that opportunity.
Yep.
Like even just put a little bit of polish on the end of his response and be like, now that I've said that, that's why Craig's response just now is completely fucking incoherent.
Yep.
I don't know.
Talks that in the laws of physics that we observe today, there's no room for free will. I grant that I consider you to be a rational critical thinker. So how do you reconcile critical thinking if at the same time you believe you don't have the free will to choose between true and false premises and valid and invalid logic? If those choices are made for you, how is anything anybody says not immediately irrational?
I know I'm in trouble when someone says, I consider you to be a rational thinker before they ask me the question. So I think I'm not exactly sure what you read. I think if you read carefully, I believe in free will. I'm pro free will. I think that free will is an emergent concept in a universe which at the fundamental level is completely mechanistic. I think there are laws of physics that do not involve what we call a libertarian approach to free will. I do not think that human beings supersede the laws of physics. I think that human beings are collections of elementary particles interacting according to the laws of physics. And if I was able to write down every single particle in my body and I had a Laplace's demon level of computational ability, I could predict what I would do. But I don't have any of that. I don't have the information, the microstate of my quantum mechanical wave function. And therefore, the vocabulary I use to describe myself is as a human being making choices according to rational principles. And I think that it is absolutely legitimate in that framework to say free will is real. It is the most I ever wrote on free will was a short blog post called Free Will is as Real as Baseball. Baseball is nowhere to be found in the fundamental laws of physics. It is a description at a collective level of things that happen in the macroscopic world. That doesn't mean that baseball doesn't exist. It just means it's not there in the fundamental laws. I would say that free will is exactly the same way. So I think there's nothing wrong with using the language of people making choices, people being correct or incorrect.
Well, it seems to me that on your view, free will is ultimately illusory because everything we do is determined by what goes on the fundamental level. And therefore, even...
Bill's pissing me off again. On Bill's view, there's no such thing as free will because everything was already predetermined by his creator at the instant of creation. You may think you have a choice, but God knew what was going to happen and spun the universe in such a way that it would.
Yeah, so there's a few arguments for that. And I personally keep to, well, if God knows everything that's going to happen, then you can't possibly make any other choice than the one that God knows. And there's sort of some arguments that are thrown back at that sort of, so you have free will, God just knows the outcome beforehand. I don't get it. But theists, they want to try and have their cake and eat it too. They want to say that God knows everything that will happen and planned everything, but you still get free will. And I don't understand that. I don't understand that argument at all.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense to me. Now, there is a case to be made that the universe is entirely deterministic, and what we perceive of this free will is an illusion, but the case is exactly as strong as that free will, as we perceive it, is an emergent property, like Carroll was describing. I don't really have a strong conviction one way or the other on that, because it seems to me that whether we really choose or it's an illusion, we still have to go through the paces. It's effectively identical. So it doesn't really matter which one is actually the case.
Yeah.
Though I have the illusion of free will, if I could really understand it, I would see that in fact I'm determined to do everything that I do, including believing in determinism, which makes my choice to believe in determinism, it seems to me, irrational, or irrational, I should say. I'm simply determined to believe in determinism. So I don't think it's helpful to talk about free will as an emergent reality when at a fundamental level you're affirming determinism. Then it's freedom only in name and not in reality. And in that case, I think the questioner is right. It's very difficult to see how anything I do is rational. It's just like a tree growing a branch. It's all determined by mindless forces.
Well,
yeah, or as Christopher Hitchens put it, I must believe in free will. I have no choice.
Yes.
Which I love from him, like just sums up Hitch's sort of way with words. I don't know. I lean a bit towards compatibilism. I sort of think that perhaps we can make a sort of like Sean Carroll was saying, an emergent property, but also a feedback loop. We can kind of change the way that we think by inputting into the system, into that system. But you know, the hard determinist will say, "Hey, but that was determined ahead of time." So I don't think that determinism can be shown to be true or shown to be false. I don't know how you do that.
Yeah, it'd be quite the struggle to work up some kind of actual experiment to test for it. And I don't know. Like I said, I don't really think it matters at the end of the day, because even if we find it out that it is true, that everything we think we're choosing is actually a subconscious response to certain stimuli or the chemical levels in our brain inclining us towards one direction or the other. I don't know. I don't know that it matters, but also I think the only reason people struggle with it is because we can move matter with our mind. We can move our bodies. We are effectively little bitty first causes, the uncaused prime mover of our own little sphere of reality. But if we don't have free will, that's not the case. We're no longer able to exercise these miniature divine abilities. We're simply reacting, just like a pile of chemicals.
It also has implications for morality and most especially sort of punishment over morality. Because if somebody is just the product of their the deterministic sequences of things that produce them, and their actions are just the result of a deterministic sequence of events, of physical events, then how do you hold someone responsible for anything anymore? Because they didn't choose to do it, right? It was all chosen for them by a series of events that happened at the start of the universe. Because that's what you're doing. You're going back and saying, hey, this caused this, would cause this, cause this. So, it has significance for A, morality, and B, sort of penal stuff, like, you know, penalizing people for transgressions.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I can kind of see a moral argument being made for if everything is entirely determined, then you're not really responsible for your actions, so it wouldn't be fair for us to hold you responsible. However, if it is all determinism and everything is a response to stimuli, then even if you're not morally to blame for your actions, holding you responsible will serve as a stimuli in a deterrent fashion to other people when they make their decision-making algorithm process.
Well, that's
so
true.
There's still a good reason to do it.
Yeah, but it sort of it comes with, well, how do you judge them for doing that kind of thing? Like it's more, I guess it's more ethical problems. Sure. Yeah, you're right. It is more sort of morality and ethics that you're really talking about.
Yeah, it's all very murky. And again, I don't think it really matters, but I mean, some people are more interested. There's people who think that my interest in how the universe operates doesn't really matter because it doesn't affect anything going on in our daily lives here on Earth. Whether the Earth goes around the sun or there's a black hole at the center of the galaxy, it doesn't change the price of gas or whether there's fresh muffins today, you know?
Right.
Dr. Craig, it's an honor to speak with you tonight. I was going to ask Dr. Carroll.
Yeah.
Pragmatic approach. Yeah, no, there's something to be said for a pragmatic approach. We still have to live, you know.
Yeah, it's just we all have our own interests. So I guess I probably shouldn't crap on people whose interests are those things that I'm like, meh, it doesn't matter, you know. It just doesn't appeal to me, that's all.
Something, but the line was so long, and I like short lines, so I came over here.
I'm not an. You could say if you were Dr. Carroll, what would you?
There you go. I'm not an atheist, an agnostic, or a classical theist. I feel like there's a middle camp between the two of you that's ignored, and I'm more along the lines of a panentheist and along the lines of Spinoza and Einstein. And I think that whole discussion gets lost here tonight. But there's the real question I want to get to, and the important one I think is what Roger Penrose talks about with the necessity of conscious observation and the neglect of the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics among practicing physicists who seem to ignore the necessity of conscious observation creating quantum decoherence. And I wanted to find out what you thought about Roger Penrose and his ideas. And that. Thank you.
Okay, we're getting into the observer effect. He could have shortened that question down quite a bit. This should be fascinating. And also, Beamsy, how dare you bring muffins here and not have some? You need to share with the class.
So rude. So rude.
Muffins are more important than physics. It's true.
Yeah.
And I think we have a consensus on that one.
Yep. I'm right there with you. It's Rembrandt. I'm on your page, mate.
Muffins.
Well, there are at least 10 different physical interpretations of the equations of quantum mechanics, and they're all empirically equivalent, they're mathematically consistent, and no one knows which, if any of them, is the correct physical interpretation. I'm inclined to agree with philosophers of science who think of the traditional Copenhagen interpretation as really just quite unintelligible, and I'm therefore more inclined to some sort of deterministic theory of quantum mechanics, like David Bohm's quantum mechanics. Now, I know that Sean Carroll holds to Everett's many worlds interpretation, but that again seems to me to be just fantastic and has difficulty making sense out of the probabilities in quantum theory. But basically, I don't think we need to decide. No one knows for sure what is the correct physical interpretation. It works, and that's what the practicing scientist is concerned with, but it remains a matter of deep debate as to how to understand it.
Well, I'm glad we found another very important area of agreement between Dr. Craig and myself. The Copenhagen interpretation is basically nonsense. No thoughtful person still holds to it, and yet we teach it to all of our undergraduates. That's kind of a scandal. And and no one knows what the right answer is. I would also agree with that. I do hold to many worlds interpretation. I think that you see it's a sort of consistent split that we have, because people do, when faced with the statement of the many worlds interpretation, it bothers them at an emotional level. I mean, where do you put all of those worlds? How do you fit them into the universe? But when you look at the level of the equations, it is the simplest possible interpretation of quantum mechanics. There are important questions that are still raised about it. I'm also writing papers about that. I think these are important issues to be addressed. But I judge simplicity by the number of ideas and concepts, not by the number of universes.
Well, thank you for taking my question. Assume we had a model of the universe that corresponds to reality.
Okay. I expected that to go somewhere else. But yeah, I'm trying to spell Copenhagen so I can pull up a quick description for anybody who might not be familiar.
I think that what he probably should have gone, or I would have liked to see Sean Carroll sort of say is, well, yeah, all of these hypotheses, none of them we're certain about. I hold to many worlds. What he said was fine. It was fine. But I would have liked to say that there is no hypothesis for God. Because we can't, that is the least probable explanation out of all of these hypotheses. So I would have liked him to get spicy and say, hey, Copenhagen explanation is a better one than God.
Well, I mean, it does have some pluses. So the Copenhagen interpretation is the idea that many people have probably heard, because like Carroll said, we still teach that to undergrads even though no one believes it. Right. But people who only get like the 101 and 202 level physics classes might think that that's part of the standard model. It's basically... the summary here reads, the Copenhagen interpretation explains that a quantum particle does not exist in one state or another, but in all of its possible states at the same time. That's that idea of superposition being stretched to not only combinations of traits, but to the particles themselves. They're in all possible states.
Yeah.
That's not been shown by the data. From our particle colliders or anything else. It hasn't been substantiated in any meaningful way. It's just an extension of what we call, today we call Schrodinger's equations, where complex systems exist in superposition rather than individual particles. The second thing, and I wish this were the highlighted part, so I'll highlight it myself, is that observation is needed to collapse the wave function and see the reality of the state. That's classical Schrodinger's box, the cat in the box. That's also where people get this idea about the observer effect. And even top-level scientists get confused about this. There was a fellow who addressed the Royal Society a few years ago who went at great lengths to explain the observer effect as it relates to the double slit experiment and then made it clear that he didn't understand what was going on and proposed anybody who could explain it to him would be virtually guaranteed a Nobel Prize the next year, when in reality, I think even Craig understands that the observer effect isn't really a thing that happens. It's an illusion of how we conduct our experiments. Like in the double slit experiment, for example, we're not actually observing the electrons. We can't do that. Our eyes aren't that precise. And you can't use an electron microscope on an electron either, because you're shooting electrons at electrons, right? So the only way to observe what the electron is doing when it's going through one slit or the other is to turn on an electromagnetic field as a detector. So when the electron goes through the field, or not, you know which slit it went through. But the problem there isn't that it's being observed, it's that you put an electromagnetic particle / wave through an electromagnetic field, which of course is going to change its behavior. It's not observing it, it's a freaking electromagnetic field interfering with the way the thing behaves. So yeah, observer effect is fucking nonsense, at least in regards to the Copenhagen
version of it. Yeah. So, but I think the reason why they teach this to lower level physicists is because it's a lot easier to understand than sort of when they start to talk about many worlds and sort of, you know, these high level interpretations that you can quickly become lost. You know, like this is the easiest way to explain the concepts and what's happening, even though there's much more advanced hypotheses. It's why that, you know, we don't teach the high level programming to first year students, kind of thing. We essentially teach them a really rudimentary wrong way to program until they have the basics. And then we teach them the concepts that they'll need to know. Like, you don't start somebody on advanced recursive and you know, or you don't start somebody on graphs. Basically, you start them on procedural stuff like you know, if then else kind of stuff.
It's similar to construction in a way. Like when you're teaching somebody to be a stonemason, first you teach them how to lay a level wall. Then you teach them how to not do that, so there's openings for the plumbing and whatnot. But you have to start with, well, the foundation, if you will. Otherwise, none of the rest of it is going to matter.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we covered that one, and everybody else is still distracted by edibles, so I think we can go on.
Oh, look, the chat's gone. Like, it just takes Beansy to bring up muffins and the chat's off. It's gone. Chat tangents worse than we do. I blame chat, quite frankly. I blame all of you in chat.
Or, alternately, it means we should bring Beamsy on for a cooking show, and we'll get much better views.
Maybe, yeah, maybe.
Things. Is it still logically possible to affirm the existence of a God?
Yes.
I didn't hear the final. Is it still possible?
Yeah, maybe say the whole thing over again.
Look, one more time, I'm sorry. Assume we had a model of the universe that corresponds to reality concerning all material things. Yeah. Is it still logically possible to affirm the existence of a God?
Good, so yes.
Sure.
It's logically possible to assert a whole bunch of things. And it's logically possible to assert that Isaac Newton had the right theory of gravity, and Einstein did. It's logically possible to assert the steady state theory. You can probably I get email from people who believe this. They're not very logical people, admittedly. But the way that science goes about deciding on theories is not on the basis of logic alone. It's not about, you want your theories to be logical. I think that's the minimum requirement. But there are many, many, many logical theories. One of them is that we're all living in a computer simulation. There's a mad scientist out there. One of them is that none of you exist. I'm a brain in a vat. These are all logical possibilities. At about a similar level of plausibility in my mind, there's the logical possibility that we live in a world that always obeys laws of physics, and yet God created it and is hiding from us. So that's absolutely logically possible. I don't give it a lot of credence.
Yeah, logical possibility is simply too easy. And therefore, I think probably you meant something perhaps different than just mere logical possibility. What we're talking about is maybe metaphysical possibility or plausibility. Those are the real issues that I think are important, because it would be pretty surprising if you could show that something like this would be logically impossible.
Well, Craig had the opportunity to agree with Carroll again and have some common ground, but he just had to strike off on his own. And I think he went one step too far, because there have been attempts made, and some would argue successfully, of logical proofs ruling out, if not the concept of God, specific gods, including Craig's.
What do you think about this, Ember? I will take your logical impossibility and raise you a trinity.
Oh, well. How can I possibly compete with that?
If you're talking about logical impossibility, I've never heard the Trinity explained in a logically coherent way, ever.
Yeah, same. It's well, that's why I posed it to McDowell, because I really would like an answer to that one, even if I sincerely doubt it'll convince me to suddenly become a Christian. But I would like to, not accidentally strawman people. And I'd like to understand what the fuck they're talking about. And the fact that nobody's been able to successfully describe it in a coherent way should be a strong indicator that maybe they're not on a logically coherent track, but that's just me.
Correct, yeah. No, I think that's valid.
Oh, well.
Dr. Craig, you've been very skeptical about the idea of universes just popping into existence. Does cosmology have anything to say about where God might have come from, or are we allowed to think that he could have popped into existence?
No, obviously cosmology would not have anything to say about where God came from, because God is a non-physical, transcendent entity beyond the universe. That's why I use the word transcendent in that argument. This is something that is beyond the universe. The universe is defined as all contiguous physical reality. But I do want to take this opportunity to highlight for you a very significant difference between Sean and myself that is a philosophical.
I think he overdefined it. I think the universe is more simple. He's excluding parts that should be included. I think there's no logical reason to define the universe as anything other than all of reality. Like, if we discover other universes, you could make a case that those are real and therefore part of reality, but you could make an equally strong case that they are other realities.
Well, I think I would disagree that other realities kind of thing. I think reality would just be one thing. Like, it would just be reality. Like, I think that if there was a cosmos outside the universe, that would still be part of our reality if it was in fact real. So I mean, he said contiguous physical universe. I presume he means sort of as opposed to supernatural or super, spiritual or whatever.
Yeah, it's the same thing he does with the Kalam. He puts extra qualifiers on so as to specifically set his thing apart in a special category without making it clear there's special pleading going on.
Right.
At least that's how it seems to me.
No, I agree.
Philosophical difference that has tremendous impact upon this whole debate, and that has to do with this idea of popping into existence. If I'm not mistaken, Dr. Carroll holds to what is called the tenseless theory of time.
He keeps using it. He keeps saying popping into existence. Sean Carroll pulled you up on that, not once, but twice, that it's the wrong way to describe it. So stop. Stop.
Singled it out, in fact.
Yeah, choose another word or, make another argument. It's that horse is dead, man. Let it go.
I'm just playing with my buttons.
Bane.
That is to say, past, present, and future events are all equally real. Temporal becoming is merely a...
Whoa. That is very far from certain.
Yes.
Einstein posed as a thought experiment that we might consider the past and future to be coexistent with the present in some super temporal way, but it was purely a thought experiment, and nothing has supported it, and a few things have refuted it, like the fact the present keeps moving, time flows like a river, whatever. Or if you want to look at it another way, the universe is expanding through time as well as space, since time and space are a single cohesive fabric. The universe can't.
So do you subscribe to A theory or B theory of time?
What do you mean?
Well, there's two theories of time. There's A theory, which is a sequence moving forward, and then there's B theory, which is that everything is happening concurrently.
Okay, I hadn't heard them described that way before.
Oh yeah.
I like the idea of B theory. It's fun to think about, but I think all of the evidence is on the side of A theory. At least all the evidence we have so far.
I would subscribe to B theory, tenseless time. Maybe I've got it wrong. No, I know that B theory is tenseless, right?
I don't know. I hadn't heard them. I hadn't heard those terms used to refer to these categories of possibilities. Let me see. A theory versus B theory of time. Google says A theory, presentism, denies that all times exist in parity, while B theory insists that all times do exist in parity.
Mm.
Yeah, so A is just the present, B is all the things, and we're just floating along. Now, I did hear an interesting case made in it was a fiction book, but it had some interesting ideas in it, called A Gift of Time. And in that, I've described the plot in short form in other places. The key part is that the main character is trying to invent time travel, and his first attempt works but also fails. He builds a little drone, if you will, and sends it back in time, and then it's just gone. And it takes him a week to figure out what the hell just happened, and then it finally dawns on him that the glider, the drone, he calls it a glider, the glider did go back in time, but now it's moving forward through time at the speed of time, the same as him, so it will never catch up to him.
Okay.
It's effectively created what we would call a new time stream.
Right.
I could see that in a weird way being both A and B, because for any specific observer in their frame of reference, the present is all that exists. But if you can figure out a way to move your reference frame, then that time period is the present and exists. And they both can exist simultaneously in this super time structure, if you will.
Well, I think Einstein's theory of relativity shows that B theory holds true, that things are organized in sort of before and after, rather than a series of times that all moves as one kind of thing, that they only have time functions relative to each other, that it isn't a tense time, that it's tenseless. So if you're traveling at the speed of light, your time is passing normally, but time isn't passing my time's passing normally, but time isn't passing for you, even though it still is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, things, well, the speed of light itself is one of those areas where physics breaks down.
Well, sure.
As we approach the speed of light, we experience ever increasing amounts of time dilation. We're both still moving into the future, but at different observed rates. So the overall time flow of the universe is unaffected. It's just our perception of it based on our frame of reference, our inertial frame of reference. That's what leads us to the idea of a time-space constant. You always move at a constant velocity through both space and time. The faster you move through space, the slower you move through time. But once you hit the speed of light, if you can figure out how to get there, all bets are off, because that's where the formula runs off a cliff of an infinite slope, or a divide by zero, or however you want to phrase it.
Yeah.
So it's tricky. Me personally, I think you cease to experience time entirely until Newton comes in to save your ass, which is to say, when you're acted upon by another force to bring you back into interaction with the stream of time. I'm not sure how that would work. Probably run into a planet or something, but who knows?
Don't know.
But the way the formulas vary between special and general relativity do raise an interesting possibility. In special relativity, it's completely impossible to reach the speed of light because as your mass magnifies as a result of your velocity, you approach a point where you need infinite energy to accelerate any further to cross that threshold to hit light speed. All the energy in the universe won't get you there. But general relativity,
because they don't have mass.
That's the trick. Is under general relativity, photons don't have no mass; they have zero mass. Because as we've seen, when you collide photons together, they will reverse annihilate into an electron and a positron, which will then usually immediately reannihilate back into electromagnetic radiation. But it shows that there's mass, and it strongly implies that antimatter has a kind of negative mass. We're not entirely sure how that works mathematically. It seems to function identical to regular mass. It's just bending time-space in the other direction. But that's neither here nor there. The point is, there's mass in light, it's just zero mass, which leads us to, what if we could get our total mass to zero? If antimatter does have a negative mass effect, then if you build a 100-ton spaceship and then offset it with 100 tons of antimatter, you should have a net zero total mass, and therefore could conceivably reach the speed of light. Maybe even surpass it, and then who knows what the fuck would happen. So Ninos, we become amphibians, or crocodiles, or whatever the fuck it was that happened in Voyager. That was a weird episode of Star Trek Voyager. Fairly, they do have a lot of weird questions. Beta says, simple question. If you're on a spaceship front that is flying at the speed of light, and you put your, let's say, boot, butt, sure, forward, and let gas fly, does that gas then go faster than the speed of light? Well, see, that's the tricky bit, because if you're moving at the speed of light, time is frozen for you, so you can't actually carry out the action of emitting the gas. But if you could figure out a way to preserve a time flow while you're moving at that ridiculous velocity, then I suppose it would change based on reference frame. Like, for you, just like when you're at 99.9 the speed of light, time appears to be flowing normally. For you, you're just very, very slow compared to the rest of the universe. So if you emitted gas, then for you it would operate normally. But for the rest of the universe, you'd still run into that infinite mass problem. Because even though you're emitting it, it'd be going slightly closer to light speed, but still wouldn't cross that boundary into light speed.
So what Ember's trying to say is that because of the energy required to exceed the speed of light, your sphincter muscles could in no way clench enough in order to expel that gas. It would be permanently stuck inside you because you don't have the energy to expel it. That's your answer.
Yes. You go to plaid.
You go to plaid.
Yep.
All ends in plaid.
In space, no one can see you, Klingon. I freaking love you guys.
Objective illusion of human consciousness. There is nothing privileged about the present, ontologically speaking. I hold to quite a different view of time. I think that temporal becoming is a real and objective feature of the universe. The future doesn't in any sense exist. Things really do come into being and go out of being. And that's why I use the language of popping into existence, not because I illicitly presuppose a time prior to the origin of the universe, but because I believe in a tensed theory of time, which affirms the objectivity of temporal becoming. And on that view, the beginning of the universe does not just tenselessly exist. The universe comes into being. And surely that requires a cause. Now, this is not just an unfounded metaphysical assumption on my part. I've written 2 books on this in which I defend the tensed theory of time, giving arguments for it and answering objections against it. And then I attack the tenseless theory of time, giving arguments against it and answering the arguments for it. But this is a huge metaphysical assumption that underlies this debate and divides us.
As it were.
That's kind of great.
Yeah. I'm
ran
sorry.
out of
Time is tenseless, William, and you're out of it. See ya.
Yep. Whoops, whoops, whoops. Yeah, so that's, I think I would have to actually read his books in order to really get into the meat of what he's proposing and why.
I'm not sure I would, as much as I like philosophy, I don't think I would like place my money on what a philosopher says about sort of space-time. I, I maybe William's been doing cosmology on the side, but I don't think philosophy is really where you would go to get a scientific understanding of time.
Yeah, I don't think you can logic your way into scientific knowledge. You can use logic to
Right.
rule out things, but I don't think you can
Yes.
rule in things purely logically.
So I will confess, I don't know, this is not answering your question, but it's a confession that as a scientist, there's this enormous temptation that I am constantly resisting when we're in dialogue between science and theology, which is that theologians talk about the relationship between God and time, or God's status as necessary or anything like that. And there's a big part of me that wants to say, why are you working so hard to extract yourself from these dilemmas when you can just say God doesn't exist? It just sounds crazy. And then I realize I'm a cosmologist, and the same people could say the same thing about everything that I say. There's plenty of things that I say that sound crazy. So all I'm saying is I think these are difficult, interesting questions, and it's very, very hard on the basis of thinking alone to get the right answers. That's why science has this huge advantage that we collect data.
Dr. Carroll, you asserted that theism is unreasonable, at least in part, because the term God is poorly defined. So you, at the end of your first talk, you said the solution to the problem that, from a theist point of view, the world is not as we would predict. It's easily solvable because of the flexibility of the terminology of God. So theists can simply form any of hundreds of models of God that explain why the world is the way it is while maintaining the creative agency of God. And that's unreasonable. But when you want to show the plausibility of an eternal universe, you build a model and you showed 17 of those, and you said all of them could work, but you don't think that any of them are right. They could be right, but you don't think they're right. And that is reasonable. And I'm just wondering if you could clear up for me how that's consistent.
Sure, that's fine. I think that there is a difference in principle between the theist trying to use the idea of God to explain all these different aspects of the universe and the scientist developing many, many mutually inconsistent models and not knowing which one is right until they're developed. I think that with every one of these scientific models, there is an expectation, indeed a demand, that when we understand the model perfectly, it will make absolutely unambiguous, unwriggle-outable of predictions about what the universe is like. I think this is not in principle possible in theism. I think, and different theists probably have different expectations about this, but I think that theists would not claim that once we understand God perfectly, we can predict the mass of the Higgs boson. But a physicist would claim that once we have the correct theory of everything, we will be able to predict the mass of the Higgs boson. I think that's an absolutely crucial distinction.
I love this question because in the same way that the scientists develop models of the universe in order to understand it, the theologian does the same thing with respect to God. Different models of God, understanding what he's like. And for Christians, the biblical data concerning God is underdeterminative. There's a great deal of latitude in developing your...
So this is the thing, he's missed the point. Sean Carroll's talking about, well, when we understand which of the models is correct and understand how the model works, we'll be able to say predict this about the reality, and it will be able to be, we'll accurately be able to do that. So what he's talking about is practical implementation of the knowledge. You don't get any of that with God, right? And there's no, William Lane Craig's acting like, oh, well, there's all these different hypotheses about God, and we'll find the right one. No, you won't find the right one. You'll all argue till the end of time over which model of God is right. You guys have had thousands of years to find the right model when you haven't even started. Yeah.
Yeah, it's to follow that up with a bit of perspective. Cosmology, right? There was a fierce debate over whether the universe was expanding, contracting, or static for a very long time in the 20th century. And Hubble took it upon himself to try to settle the question because he's the dude with the big telescope and all the credibility. Yeah. So he started measuring the brightness of the distant Cepheid variables, his favorite stars that you can, pin to the map and get absolute data for. And he started measuring the brightness of them. And it was based on a simple principle that a receding galaxy moving at, I forget the math, but let's say half the speed of light will be 1/4 the brightness, the luminosity of the same star at rest. And so it should be fairly simple to figure out, based on the redshift, how fast it should be receding, and then the brightness, how fast it is receding. And The data that Hubble collected went to the limits of the observable universe at that time, which was about 8 billion light years away. And unfortunately, he found himself, when he submitted his results for peer review, he got back several responses from people who modeled the data a little bit differently. The ones who wanted the universe to be contracting found that the curvature of space-time was such that it perfectly matched the brightness curve for what they were predicting. The people who wanted the universe to be static found that the data exactly matched, and it was and same thing with the expanding universe people. Basically, they ended up with different curve shapes of the universe, and all three of them met at one point, which happened to be the present. So technically, we could distinguish between these models, but not right now because of the oddity of where we happen to be in space-time. And that's kind of where Carroll is. Like, we can make all these models that don't conflict with what we know, but we can't distinguish between them without more data. But once we do, they'll be falsified. Everything that's wrong will be falsified. Whereas on Craig's side of things, the concept of a god is deliberately intended to be unfalsifiable.
Right.
Like, even if you come up with something that contradicts one supposed model of a god, all the believers just wiggle into the next model over. Like, you didn't falsify God, you just made clear that that understanding of God is incorrect. And you can't kill the damn idea because it's so sloppily defined and incoherent. Fun shit.
Model or concept of God. For example, one of the classic questions is God timeless, or is he infinite throughout all time? And theologians develop different models of God and time, and then these models are tested. You're tested not by predictivity, but they are tested by their coherence and how well, for example, they would explain how an eternal being could create the universe, or how he could know, for example, tensed facts. I've written a great deal on this, and so you're quite right in saying it's analogous or parallel.
That's not testing.
Yeah, Dr. Craig.
That's not testing.
Yeah.
That's not if you come up with something that explains in a logically coherent way all of these things about the universe, that's not testing it. Like, they're examined for logical coherence. That's not testing. Testing is when you actually go, well, if this is true, we should see this, and then you do the thing, and then if it happens, you have tested it. Like, his language is a philosophical one. He thinks that testing is basically thinking about stuff really hard and critically. That's not testing in science, William. That's just thinking about stuff really hard and critically.
Yeah. Again, logic can help you rule out possibilities, but it can't verify anything.
Correct.
Or interesting little bit in the side chat. So Einstein came up with the cosmological constant because he didn't like the idea. Okay, so it wasn't that he disliked the idea of an expanding universe. It was that his math, because he did make a mistake in his formulas. He could not figure out how to use the concept of infinity in a mathematical formula and have it make any sense. So instead of using infinity in his calculations for how the universe should behave under gravity, he used a variable that represented an ever-increasing large number. But no large number, no matter how large, is any closer to infinity, because infinity is a freaking concept. So what he got was any finite universe must be collapsing under its own gravity. And he said, well, this is obviously not the case, because our universe has not collapsed. Here it is. It's still here. So he inserted the cosmological constant to steady the universe, to provide a way that it doesn't immediately collapse. And then Lemaitre comes along, combines his math with the redshift that Hubble and Slipher worked out, and said, oh, what if the arrow of time is going in the other direction, and the universe is expanding under the force of its gravity for some still unexplained reason? We still see it in our astrophysics textbooks today. The arrow of time, for a reason we cannot even put words to, let alone comprehend, is running in the wrong direction at the highest levels of the cosmos. You and I are going forward. Our star that we orbit is going forward. The galaxy is going forward. But the cosmos itself is going backward. It is collapsing under gravity in reverse. And we have no fucking idea why.
Right.
But so Einstein removed the cosmological constant, because the universe, it exists. It can be expanding. It doesn't have to collapse under the force of its own gravity.
Right.
But then we discovered that it was expanding more than we thought it should, and we needed to we don't call it the cosmological constant anymore, but it's the same value. It's the same variable that I believe we call it the Hubble constant now, but that may just be the ratio of redshift to distance. But it does relate to the expansion anyway. But yeah, so that's trippy as hell. But that's a side rant. So Rembrandt brought that up. And then Sidney says Einstein is now regretting his regretting, and Rembrandt mentions that Einstein only does the dead. This is where it gets funny, and I know it's a long walk to get to just a little bit of funny, but humor me here. If Einstein was right about the co-temporality of different time periods, then in the past, Einstein still exists right now to regret his regretting.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what amuses me.
Use the Bohr-Guth-Langton theorem to justify an absolute beginning of the universe. I was curious how you'd address the point that was brought up about Guth probably holding that the universe, in fact, was eternal.
I haven't spoken to him about it. I have spoken with Vilenkin. I think they would agree that the theorem, under this single condition that it states, shows that classical space-time did have to have a beginning. And Guth doesn't dispute that. He says that. Now, when he holds up a little sign saying, I think the universe is probably eternal, that's probably just reflecting a sort of personal preference or skepticism that maybe we'll find a quantum theory or something that will be a non-classical model that will restore the eternality of the universe.
Or, alternatively, you're misrepresenting what he said. Alternatively.
What? That never happens.
Really? Never seen a creationist do that.
Yeah, so, Vilenkin, he's the guy behind multiverse theory. He doesn't have a problem with there being a beginning to the universe,
yes,
from a philosophical standpoint, because he believes there's a near infinite number. Possibly there's a finite number. There may be some kind of harmonic thing going on, like why are the planets arranged like they are? There's some sort of orbital harmonic going on. So there may be a finite number.
Synchronicity.
Yeah, kind of thing. But he doesn't care if the universe has a beginning, because there's no philosophical implication for him. Guth probably doesn't care if there's a beginning, because that's not what he's interested in either. His whole thing is the inflationary model, which only takes effect a fraction of a second after the Big Bang. Guth is like it. Our math still breaks down at the moment of the Big Bang, at the singularity. But we can describe what happened just after, for now.
Yeah. Well, we've got to, in order to show whether it did have a beginning, we've got to overcome sort of that Planck time hurdle, that time after the presupposed start, and start to look backwards into it. Until we can do that, we don't know.
Yeah, it's very similar to our problem with abiogenesis. Like an evolutionary biologist can push back all the way to the earliest cells, but that's still not the same thing as where did life come from. But abiogenesis is a separate question. Much like how did the Big Bang happen isn't technically an astrophysics question or a cosmology question. It's at this point, it's a metaphysical question because our science doesn't let us explore that area yet.
It's cosmogony is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I learned a new word.
Yeah.
And I'm going to use it, damn it.
Hell yeah.
Could be his predisposition or his hope or hunch or something of that sort. But in terms of scientific evidence, there's no evidence at all that the universe is beginningless. As Vilenkin said, all of the evidence is on one side of the scale that the universe began to exist, and there are no models of a beginningless universe that are successful. So I don't know exactly what he meant by that, but I think we do know that the implications of the theorem are that any universe model that falls under its single condition will have a beginning to classical spacetime. And also I would say that models that don't fall under that condition usually always have other problems as well. And then I argued that this quantum gravity regime that preceded, if there was such a thing that preceded the classical space-time regime, that marked the beginning of the universe if the universe didn't begin at the classical space-time boundary.
He in a way he's deflecting. He's hyper focusing, splitting hairs, showing off his vocabulary and how much he truly understands the science in order to dance around his actual supposed point. It doesn't matter which way the universe had a beginning. We can grant the universe had a beginning for the sake of argument. It's on Craig to demonstrate that he knows who the beginner is and how. And he's so focused on the science to avoid engaging with that, which must be his ultimate point.
Yeah, but it's what creationists do. They sort of go, well, you've got to show that it had a naturalistic origin to avoid the sort of burden of proof that's on them to show that their claim of who made... And that's why he was couching, well, I'm not presenting scientific theory kind of thing, so hard, because he said, oh, well, the none of these have got any scientific evidence behind them. Neither does your God. And you said that it did, but it doesn't.
Yeah, it's it's a tactic I use whenever I'm confronted with a creationist and I have the liberty of where I want to go with the argument. They'll come out with something along the lines of, well, abiogenesis hasn't been answered, therefore creator. And, you know, of course, you lead off with, that's God of the gap, special pleading, etc. But I find that it's often useful to just say, okay, for the sake of argument, cool, God. How do we know which one? How can you demonstrate your solution is the correct solution? And I have yet to encounter an opponent who knows what to do with that. They're just dead. If you give them the first point that they're fighting so hard for, they don't know what second point to make, because there just isn't an argument beyond that.
I don't think Billy Boy here has that problem, because then he will launch right into, well, let's look at probabilities and why Christianity is the most probable. He has got something for that. I know that he does. I have seen him reel it off before. So he will go, okay, God, here's why it's not deistic, because personal, time or spaceless, etc., personal God, which is the most likely, sort of. So he'll do this abductive song and dance, or this sort of probability song and dance to say, hey, well, Christianity is definitely the most probable, therefore you should believe in it. So I know that he does have something for that.
Okay, so that I get you, because I've seen Frank Turek do a similar thing. In fact, he doesn't even wait for his opponent to say, okay, for the sake of argument, let's say that a God is more probable. Can you demonstrate? Frank just assumes that he's already 1.1 and launches off into, here's how we know the resurrection is true, Yeah. Ay.
So I don't think it's the right thing to say that the Borda-Guth-Vilenkin theorem says that the classical universe had a beginning. The part of the universe that we can describe using classical space-time had a beginning, just like this room has a beginning. But that says nothing at all about the universe as a whole. Alan Guth does not believe the universe is eternal because it's a hunch or a personal preference. It's because he's a scientist and he's trying to develop models that fit the data. We have puzzles in cosmology. Given his knowledge of the models, he believes the best way forward, the most promising way forward, are the models in which the universe is eternal. He knows that there is a theorem saying that if you obey the rules of quantum mechanics under the assumptions I gave, the universe must be eternal. He knows the early universe had a low entropy, and the best possible explanation we currently have for dynamically explaining that involves an eternal cosmology. This is exactly how scientists work all the time.
Dr. Carroll, someone actually asked this question earlier. So
yeah, that's
that
pretty
was a nice
solid
response. Yeah,
I understand he had a 1-minute response. I wish he would have dropped a couple of citations so I could look up some of these things. But yeah, for the time, pretty solid.
Just kind of repeat and maybe have some further comment on it. But suppose there was, naturalistic model of the universe and everything. What would your rebuttal be for someone who said there is yet a God that still works outside that model? Those might be kind of unfalsifiable, but I'd still like to comment on it.
Sure, I think that, again, it is absolutely conceivable that, let's go all the way to the extreme. I completely can conceive of a universe that was brought into existence by God, who is omnipotent and so forth, and for whatever reason, God has chosen to be completely invisible and the universe runs by purely naturalistic principles. In that case, I'm not saying that it is logically impossible or even that it is illegitimate to conceive of that possibility. I just say it gets you nothing. By all of the conventional standards of scientific or even philosophical explanation, if I have two possible models that fit what we observe about the universe, and one of them has less stuff, less ideas, is more self-contained, is more rigid and well-defined than the other one, I'm going to prefer that one. I'm never going to say I completely rule the other one out. And this is not not a completely hypothetical circumstance. Cosmology, quantum mechanics, quantum field theory, particle physics are full of many, many models that are in principle compatible with the data, but only if you take some parameters and push them out where they shouldn't be, make them very, very small, make them very, very invisible. We put limits on our theories. We do not rule them out entirely. But when the limits, the constraints become so strong, the theories become uninteresting. We have a better way of moving forward. To me, that's the situation with naturalism versus theism.
The arguments that I've offered tonight are consistent with the universe being self-contained in the way that Dr. Carroll described, so that needn't be an issue of debate between us. But I don't see any reason to think that the universe is self-contained. I don't see any reason at all to think that the transcendent God doesn't act miraculously in the world. And there's simply no way that Dr. Carroll, as a scientist, could know that God never acts miraculously.
Well, there's two problems. The first is we have no reason to think so. We never observe it.
Right.
Like there's no reason to think that nil isn't going to come flying by and drop off a brand new creator god to make the next planet over for us to go co-inhabit when we burn up the earth or something. But no one has ever observed anything that indicates that's likely to be the case either. And then there's on top of that, not only do you have the higher ontological cost of buying into an extra layer of presumption, assumption, knowledge, if you will, though I wouldn't call anything unconfirmed like that knowledge. I'm not quite sure how to phrase it. I think I kind of accidentally overran my second point on my first point with the...
Well, yeah. Well, I think my point would be he's kind of saying, hey, Sean Carroll can't show us all the miracles that God has... Show us all the miracles God hasn't done. Right?
Yeah, that's it. Like,
it's kind of that shifting the burden of proof again. It's sort of saying, well, I think God does interfere with the world, and Sean Carroll can't show us all the non-miracles.
The miracles was the thing, the key to the second point. A couple of scientists have said that the fact that science works in a repeatable way, it doesn't rule out miracles, but the fact that there's never supernatural interference making the results unpredictable kind of demonstrates that there's never supernatural interference. It's not a direct negation, but every time we do an experiment and the results fall within naturalistic parameters, it kind of shows that there aren't miracles that need some kind of justification for them. You can have unexplained phenomenon and have them not be miraculous. Although on the flip side, I must point out that I recently came across a theist. It was in someone else's TikTok, so I don't know the name of the theist. I hope I find him so I can respond to some of his stuff. But he said that healing, the fact that we heal, is a miracle because it says in the Bible that the followers of Jesus would have a miraculous ability to cause healing. Prior to that guarantee by Jesus, humans didn't have the ability to heal. We're too complex of an organism. We've lost the natural regeneration that we see in earthworms and things. It's only because of Jesus. So when you get a cut and it heals over, that's literally a miracle to him. And I'm like, my goodness. So I guess it depends on what you define as a miracle. And what you can
look,
prove.
I got one the other day that was beautiful. It was like in this room, and they said, I said, what would convince you? And I'm like, I don't know, amputees regrowing limbs. And they're like, well, according to evolution, we grew limbs. So doesn't that make that a miracle?
What?
Like whales and sort of, we were simple organisms, and then we grew limbs. So doesn't that make it? It's yeah.
I mean, I might describe our powers of vision like, so many creationists go for the eyeball. It's too complex to be explained, even though we've explained it many, many times in rather great detail. But our sense of vision, to me, and our other senses to a lesser extent, is kind of miraculous, just because we understand how it arose, how it works, what it does, what the survival advantage of having it is. We're We can see frickin' radio waves of a high enough frequency. That's fucking crazy. We can observe our environment in a way beyond our physical contact by making use of this resource that cellular life at a pre-brain level could never be aware of existing. But what really bends my brain is blind organisms have no idea there is light. And this is a thing from that Andy Weir book, Project Hail Mary. The alien that the human meets doesn't have vision. They use modified echolocation to sense the world around them. And it takes him a while to wrap his head around what vision even is. He's like, you hear with radar? It's a trip. And so that makes me think, what other possible senses might there be that we don't have and are completely unaware of because evolution just never rolled the random dice to head down that road?
Right.
It's very fascinating. But that's, again, way the fuck off topic. The point was, we don't see miracles, so Craig is saying theism is the best description for the universe under science plus miracles, but we don't have miracles that need explaining, so we don't have a need for that hypothesis. Or so it seems to me, but, maybe I'm black swanning it, and I just haven't observed a clear miracle,
in the universe. So that the idea that the universe is causally closed or self-contained is really a naturalistic article of faith. It's a metaphysical presupposition, not an inference drawn on the basis of science.
Dr. Craig, I really have enjoyed listening to both of you today. My question is,
Can you speak directly into the mic, please?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oftentimes, when particularly believers or theists are talking about religion inside the arena of religion, they are very, very comfortable. They know what they're talking about. But when they leave that arena and they go into places and talk about cosmology or they talk about medicine, it seems like that they are trying to make their religious beliefs fit into that sphere. So my question is this: and given that you said a few seconds ago, God is not of this world or bigger than this world, why would He find it important to have a discussion about medicine or find it important to have a discussion about the stars? Why would that be significant or irrelevant to Him? Because He's omnipotent.
As a systematic theologian, I am committed to having what I call a synoptic worldview. That is to say, a worldview that takes into account all of the data of human experience, not only what we learn from revealed truth in theology, but also from science, from history, from psychology.
Revealed truth.
Yeah, that's where you lose me.
Truth.
Because if you can't confirm it, you can reveal any kind of truth you like. I can have a hallucination where Bigfoot is actually the prophet of some heretofore unnamed god, and he tells me the secrets of how to achieve eternal life or whatever. But how the fuck are we supposed to confirm that? Is it really truth if it's revealed but can't be backed up with anything?
So I've run into lately this idea that theists sometimes use the word truth to refer to what is useful or beneficial in their life. So if something is a truth, it's kind of that whole idea of, well, it's true for me because it helps me in this way kind of thing. It helps me to think of this as true. So I'm not sure if that's what he's getting at or whether it's just a presupposition that what he reads is true. But yeah, I take great objection with using that phrase, that automatically what you read in the Bible is revealed truth. I think that's sort of making a knowledge claim that it's true without any justification for it.
Mm-hmm. That kind of gets to the crux of the problem with religion, is because we can agree on all the science all day long, but it's not even entirely that Christians are putting an extra layer of ontology into their worldview. It's that they're trying to support that extra layer by pretending a bunch of made-up shit equals fact, and they can't demonstrate that it's not made-up shit.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody can do that. I can make up a whole bunch of shit. I'm honest enough to say that it's made-up bullshit, but
it's revealed truth. It's revealed truth, Ember. What are you talking about? It's
I know. I'm so bad at this job.
I know. It's not made up shit. It's revealed truth. Get it right.
Yeah, for real. Like, a few people have mentioned in a few streams that I actually could have potential as a preacher once I really get my steam up and get a roll going. So I guess I really ought to learn the lingo and remember, made up bullshit is revealed truth. If I just refer to it that way, it's unquestionable. No one can challenge me because it was revealed to me.
Right.
You have to
It's
ask
revealed,
the great spirit of your choice to reveal it to you also. But first you have to believe. Believe sincerely or it won't be revealed. Sorry, tough luck. Them's the breaks.
Right.
As a Christian, I want to have a world and life view that makes sense of reality. And so I think that's why the Christian is vitally interested in these subjects, and why I, as a philosopher and theologian, am terribly interested in these scientific theories about the origin of the universe, about the fundamental nature of physical reality, about the origin and evolution of biological complexity. I want to have a worldview that makes sense of the data of science. And I think that's one of the great things about the Christian worldview, is that it does form a coherent worldview that answers our deepest questions and yet is consistent with what we learn from other sources of knowledge. So that's why I am committed to the project of developing this sort of synoptic world and life view.
So that touches on a few things that various scientists have mentioned over the years, that from their point of view, understanding how the universe works and the whys that we can get to are like reading God's blueprints. It isn't necessarily incompatible. There's any number of former creationists who are now just more mainstream Christians because it dawned on them that evolution isn't incompatible with their religion. It could just be that's the way God chose to do it. So,
and
Nick,
at a certain...
First I have to have $100. So tell God to send me $100 to send you, and then we'll talk.
Well, why doesn't God just cut out the middleman and give it straight to Nick then? That's what I want to know. So I think and theism is always playing catch up with the science kind of thing. Like it's a hard to dispute fact that science has been incredibly effective in at least a practical implementation of finding out how things work. So I think that science has had a hard time sort of justifying its position as arbiters of sort of what is real, when science is sort of, to my mind, has incredibly surpassed it. The question that I love to ask is sort of what fact about, or what truth about reality has Christianity provided us with over the last 2,000 years? Like, what has it revealed to us about how the universe or the reality works? Which is nothing. Nothing's been gained from this pointless sort of endeavor of questioning what God's doing and why God's doing it, and people still disagree about it. Nothing's been, nobody's made a plane fly on prayers or cured people in the hospital through miracles. It just hasn't happened. So
be cooler if it did, but yeah, like
cool.
even in the golden age of Islam, when they were cranking out science left and right, not a bit of it came out of the Quran.
Yeah.
It was all the people. Also, I really enjoy the expression on Craig's face right now. Yeah, that's as big as I can make it, but it's to me it just screams, did anybody buy that?
I think it's more like, I thought I was going to do well in this debate. Oh well, next time.
I'm sure he did think he was going to. Because
Maybe,
that's one of the downsides of his particular worldview, is you have to believe in things without a good reason to do so. So you're more inclined to believe in things without a good reason to do so. It's no different than every flat earther saying, well, because we believe in the Bible, yada, yada, yada.
Yes. Yeah.
You've already disabled that part of your brain that goes, I don't have a reason to believe this. Yeah. So they believe whatever the frick random stuff sets them on that path.
Yeah. And then they're down the QAnon rabbit hole because that's the way their mind works. They just believe all this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Deliberate gullibility, I suppose.
I hesitate when it comes to my job to tell believers what to think, and then I do it. So I'm not a believer, but if I were a believer, if I were a theist, to me I would think that the fact of my theism would be absolutely central to everything I believed about the world in all of its aspects. I think that there's a modern tendency to try to shield religious belief and practice from the encroachment of scientific knowledge by saying, well, my religion has to do with my practice and my values, but nothing to do with the physical world, the biological world, the scientific world. I think that is actually a much less intellectually honest point of view than one like Dr. Craig's that engages with the full picture.
Yeah, drag him into the mud pit. Drag him into the mud pit.
You want to
You're on our turf now.
Let's do Quoquay.
You're on the science turf now. Let's get into it. You're in my house.
Beamsy sent us a more accurate photo of William Lane Craig in action. And
is it safe for work, Beamsy?
It is. Okay. It's pretty accurate, I dare say. You know, it's got his uniform going down. It's got some balls, some juggling sticks, some knives. That's pretty on point. The only quibble I have is that he says the quiet part out loud.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes that happens too.
Well, I mean, he's already done that once with his low bar thing. I mean, talk about saying the quiet part out loud. I mean, he really said the quiet part. That, like, if there's not enough evidence, lower that evidence bar. Wow, dude, you're supposed to keep that to yourself. Like, seriously.
Mm-hmm. Ooh, individually wrapped bacon slices. Get me all kinds of excited.
Don't make me hungry.
And Electric Monk. Yeah, that's exactly why Lemaitre warned the Pope about it, because as Carroll's been pointing out, and
it hurts his credibility, sure, but I think William Lane Craig, he just will keep, sort of so this whole thing about God being transcendent of the universe kind of thing. Like if we did manage to like transcend the universe, that would just shift the God somewhere else. They'd say, hey, it's 5 universes down in a bigger cosmos kind of thing. Like God's just the champion of moving out of the house as soon as you can, knock on the door. He's just away to somewhere else. So, I have no doubt that should the Big Bang be falsified for God, they'll just say, oh, but he created some other process before. It just, there's an endless array of doors that they can hide God behind. I wouldn't worry about that, mate.
Yeah, that's how we ended up with this transcendent concept in the first place, is because first God was in heaven, and then we went and looked, and there was no heaven up above the clouds. Oh, well, it's in space. Well, we went and looked in space. Oh, it's on the far side of the moon. Well, we went and looked there too. Now God is completely outside the universe. He definitionally does not exist, because to exist means you have a finite location in space and time. He's nowhere in space and time, so...
that's not how I would use exist, but sure. Yeah, no, I know what you're saying, that he doesn't exist in the universe. Yeah, gotcha.
Exactly. Because that's where they have to hide him. And as soon as we can, peer through that window, oh no, he's somewhere else, and he's been there the whole time, which is what we were talking about earlier about the unfalsifiability. We can knock out whatever they're claiming now, and they just move the goalpost to the next door down.
Yep.
Every damn time. And
don't even bother to change the address.
Yeah, and it should probably go without saying, but just for the sake of completeness, when somebody does that a time or two, it doesn't technically rule out the possibility, but it's a pretty strong indicator that the idea is total bullshit.
Yeah.
Without using terms that I know you don't like, make this a how question instead of a why question. If our universe, our observable universe, had a first moment in time, and naturalism is true, then it would seem that we need to explain that with some sort of eternally existing set of conditions, and they would have to be necessary and sufficient to produce the effect, which is our universe coming into being, or having a first moment in time. So the difficulty seems to be that if we have an eternally existing set of causal conditions that are sufficient to produce the effect, why isn't the effect co-eternal with the cause? It seems like that's very problematic, and it seems like the easiest explanation to, or the most plausible explanation to how a universe with a first moment in time could come about is to say that agent causation is where we need to look, that it was a personal agent endowed with freedom of the will who can spontaneously exercise causal powers, bring about new effects. So if that's not true, how is naturalism to provide an explanation for that case?
Okay, before Carroll responds, I want to step it because he kind of like doubled up his question. The first
Yep.
is it possible for there to be a causal structure outside of the
Yep.
universe? And yes, that's what Carroll was trying to show with his models with the baby universes, and they would be
Yes.
co-eternal because
Yep.
the universe with that causal structure continues to exist while the baby universe, our universe, goes off and does its
Right.
own thing. It's just a change in
So
direction in the flow of time.
it would be coexistent with the local presentation of space-time. They would both come into existence at the same time, but it wouldn't be coexistent with the broad time that surrounds the causal establishment beforehand. So what we're talking about is that our local presentation of space-time or time would start simultaneous with that universe starting. But
Yeah,
that's nested within a larger sort of causal relationship.
Yeah, and then he jumps from there to an agent seems more reasonable, but
Yeah.
I like to use the example of an avalanche. Like it isn't intellectually satisfying to say that a pebble being blown by the wind or rolling down a hill causes a huge
Right.
avalanche. Surely there must be a being at the top with the will to make a choice, agency, and the tremendous power necessary to shove those thousands of
Oh,
tons of snow down the mountain.
it was
But in
obviously
reality,
a Yeti. It was a Yeti.
yeah,
I mean, let's
yeah, for
face
sure,
it. That's,
for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but it absolutely could be a pebble. So,
Wendigo.
yeah, we don't have to resort to an agency just makes more
Yeah.
sense. That's just argument from incredulity. And
Well,
once
I
it's
think
explained, most
yeah.
people get it.
Well, I mean, if it's an agent, show the agent. That's the thing, or show evidence of the agent's actions. It's more just an argument from incredulity that you're sort of saying, "Hey, I don't believe this could have, I don't understand or believe this could have happened naturally. Therefore, agent interference." But you haven't shown the agent, and you haven't shown where the agents interfered. You've just declared it to be more, yeah. It's just incredulity, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's two ways you can address it. You can either show the agent, which is the easiest way, or you can rule out anything that isn't an agent, and he hasn't done either, or even tried to.
Well, I don't know how you rule out anything that isn't an agent. I mean, I remember running into this guy and sort of, I put the Blarney Stone on full display kind of thing. The Blarney Stone's the magical stone. And it broke his mind because he couldn't say, hey, you're just substituting this for a god because it's not an agent. But at the same time, there's no way he could prove logically that it wasn't a Blarney Stone. Like he just couldn't, like a transcendent stone that works on magic. It is just as likely, if in a vacuum with no other sort of priors, that a magical stone and a miraculous god, there's no way to logically disprove any of them. So my point is, when I do that, is saying, well, it should be up to me to show that it is a Blarney Stone. And it is up to you to show that it is a god, not just say, hey, here's this logical explanation. Because it's logical, you have to disprove it. Oh, the frost giants, yeah. Yep.
Which actually does have significance because there's that saying, Yahweh makes all these promises, but Odin promised no frost giants, and I don't see any frost giants. And yet here Nias pointed out evidence of frost giants. So Odin has some splaining to do.
Actually, Jesus promised to return, but Odin promised to wipe out the frost giants. And I don't see any frost giants around, but apparently there are frost giants there.
They're just hiding too. They're not quite
And
as
it
good
also-
as gods are, but
It also is like, because the people they'll say, oh, well, if it's not naturalistic, it's got to be a design, right? But in actual fact, the formation of the world under the Norse mythology was that a frost giant died, a Ymir, and the world formed out of Ymir, like his bones became the mountains and his blood the rivers kind of thing, right? They have this explanation, which is not naturalistic and it's not design. right? So they've got an example. There's also another one, I think it's in Ethiopia. There's a tribal legend that the world was vomited forth by a god, which is just fantastic imagery, and would probably explain, like, Florida. And yeah, I'm just picking on Florida today. And so these are two options that I don't believe them, of course, but they're not design and they're not naturalistic. So your false dichotomy is on full display.
Yeah, I really like that example. Like, I reference Odin all the time as the Allfather, but it had slipped my mind that he did the killing that caused the world to form out of the corpse of the fallen Titan, I guess, for lack of a better term, because it wasn't really a god, but that's neither here nor there. But yeah, the features we see are just like an effect kind of thing.
Yep.
Yeah, I think this is a good question in the sense that this is the kind of issue that tugs at our ability to make sense of these large cosmic questions given our everyday experience with reality. But I will give you a frustrating answer to it by denying your premise. I do not think that if the universe has a first moment in time, that means there's any sort of eternal or pre-existing conditions or rules or laws or anything like that. It simply means that our best and maybe the correct description of the cosmos is one that had a first moment in time. The question is, can that be self-contained in the sense that I'm using it, which is that if I write down the equations and the conditions and so forth that describe the universe at the earliest moment, am I done? Are there questions that I might have about that universe that cannot be answered by that formalism? I think there's no obstacle whatsoever to coming up with such models. And so I would simply unask the question. I would say that no, there aren't pre-existing or eternal rules. There's the universe, and the universe has a first moment, and the universe obeys rules during those moments when the universe exists. During those moments when the universe does not exist, there are no moments, there is no time, there are no rules.
This question is very closely related to the argument that I gave against the quantum gravity regimes being past eternal. Namely, if the causal conditions that are present there are sufficient for the effect, then the effect would have always been there. But if they're not sufficient, then it becomes incomprehensible why they appeared just 13.7 billion years ago. And therefore, it seemed to me, I argued, that this regime would itself have to have a beginning and come into existence. The contrast with this is when you have a libertarian agent with free will, he can exist from eternity and then freely decide to produce an effect in time without any antecedent determining conditions. And so in that sense,
So basically he's asking, and this is I've run into before, when you say, hey, before space-time there was no time, so that becomes eternal. And they're like, well, what made it decide to be formed? And it's sort of like, no, you're thinking about it the wrong way. You're thinking, hey, it was going for a certain amount of time and then came into existence. You're applying time to a timeless space. It was both instantaneous and never ending. This is a fundamental misunderstanding of what it means to be without time, because you're sort of saying, hey, why did it not exist for all this period and then come into existence? Must have had an agent do it. No, there is no time before it.
It seems to me he's got it entirely backwards. Like, I'm thinking about it. It recently came up on after Aaron's show this morning. Lawrence is having a dental procedure done that requires full anesthetic, so he's going to be lights out. So he was asking those of us who've had full anesthesia, what it's like, and that reminded the discussion of how it's like you're switched off and there's no sense of lost time. It's so eerie, but that reminded me of what it's like to be born. Like, okay, you're X number of years old, but why did you choose to come into existence only that specific number of years ago? Well, you didn't. Another effect caused you to come into existence. And then your time, the time you're aware of, the time you have existed for, that clock started at that moment. Before then, you were not in time. There's just nothing there. It's not an eternal state because it's incomprehensible. The universe is exactly the same. It was 13.7 billion years ago. That's not just some arbitrary number, but it's also not the necessary result of any particular choice made by any particular entity. That's when it happened because that's when it happened. The same as you were born on the day you were. In your case, there's causal agents behind it, but from your own internal perspective, that's irrelevant.
Yeah. So you were always non-existent until you existed, kind of thing. There was that, but it to you, because time hadn't started yet, that non-existence, that period of timelessness is eternal.
Yeah, in a certain I don't like the word
Atemporal,
eternal
yes,
because it applies across all of time, but I don't have a better word to put there.
Yeah, no, Nee's got it. Atemporal, right? So not subject to any time whatsoever. So that whole idea of, well, what changed it from this to the other thing? It's like, well, you're sort of inferring that there was a time where it just progressed and then turned on. No, it started all at once, but before that it was in a state that was atemporal, just there.
Yeah, and thank you, Beck, for posting the linkies. I appreciate that.
See, nobody's even sure of this. That's the thing. Like, all of this is just, hey, this is how the maths would work. It suggests this. Nobody's claiming this is absolutely true, but sort of William Lane Craig's entire argument hinges on the beginning of the universe. It has to have a beginning. So he's paddling that canoe so hard because, it has to for his argument to work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's predisposed to his presuppositions, because if he gives them up, it's effectively a concession. And we have a super chat from Majestic Beck, just wondering, if you blow ember, will they glow? I'm not sure how to answer that because I'm limited by my perspective. I suppose we'd have to find someone who has tried it, for science.
Theism provides, I think, an explanatorily superior account of the origin of the universe because it's got the explanatory power that is vested in an agent with libertarian free will.
It doesn't have any explanatory power. It doesn't have any. It doesn't explain how God did any of these. That's the thing. Just saying God, just because your explanatory scope is massive, like it's so vague it could mean anything, doesn't mean it has explanatory power. It doesn't mean it explains the processes in which it happened. Yeah, it's got a lot of scope. Great. You can explain anything with God. Great. Fantastic. Explanatory power is saying, hey, it explains this really well that we can make testable predictions and rely on it. Like, evolution has explanatory power. It explains a whole bunch of what we see, even makes testable predictions for it. Yours doesn't have explanatory power. It's only got explanatory scope. Wow. Wow.
It's so trippy that he understands so much, and yet some very, very basic principles he either doesn't understand or pretends not to understand. Either he's literally an idiot savant, or he's being deliberately dishonest.
Oh, I think he's being deliberately dishonest, to be honest with you. I really think that he knows that it doesn't have explanatory power, and he's just smuggling in that term to make it sound like he's on par with science.
Arr. Makes me all piratey.
I'm going to ask that stupid question.
Mind you, he's not a scientist. Admittedly, he's not a scientist. He doesn't have a science background. He has a philosophy background. That's important. So he might not even... It may be that he doesn't understand what explanatory power means in science.
I'm not sure what grant you're applying for, but you may want to look into the foundation behind it.
But I don't really understand, like, how do you come up with the probability or improbability, as you have been saying, of the universe, if it's a universe, when a universe has only begun once? Like, how do you come up with that? Don't you have to have more scores to calculate such a probability?
Yeah.
I am so glad someone asked that question.
Yep. Bayesian analysis is your answer.
Which argument is this relevant to in your mind?
Oh,
Well, you said
dodge!
there's a universe, and then you have been repeating a lot that it's highly improbable that it just popped out of.
Oh, like the
nothing.
finely tuned universe. Okay, I don't think this is a good objection to fine tuning, because what we can do is simply conceptualize a multitude of universes by varying these constants and quantities and seeing what would result. So, for example, the physicist John Barrow gives the following illustration. He says, put a red dot on a piece of paper and let that be our universe. Now, alter slightly one of the constants or quantities. That will make a new universe. If it's life permitting, make it a red dot. If it's life prohibiting, make it a blue dot. Now do it again, and do it again, and do it again, until your sheet of paper is filled with dots. And what you will come up with is a sea of blue with only a couple of pinpoints of red. And
We don't know that.
Yeah, we don't know that. And you're assuming that all of the probabilities of these universes are exactly the same. Like when the universe is forming, that it doesn't have like sort of a 90% to fall within this range. So in actual fact, what you might be doing in order to represent the statistics correctly is put a multitude of red dots, which is the 90% to fall within this range, and then a few blue dots. You don't know that. This is the problem with these Bayesian analysis. You have to do priors that assume certain conditions, and that is that all of the constraints that he is talking about on the physical laws of the universe are all of equal probability.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just the whole only the properties we observe within this universe calibrated to their exact value allow for a life permitting universe. We don't know, but also. What are the probabilities of a universe not just permitting alternate forms of life, but permitting our form of life, but better? Like, maybe without 90% of the universe being immediately deadly to us, for example.
Yes. Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, even if you want to assign the probabilities of every conceivable value as being exactly equal, which is almost certainly not the case, but of course we can't know that without some outside information, then you still have to factor in the possibility of other kinds of life, as well as universes that are better at life permitting than our own is, not just worse. So he's limited his hypothetical pool of infinites by 2/3 in order to make it favor his preferred conclusion, which is just kind of bullshit. For science.
it's in that sense that one can say that these finely tuned universes are enormously improbable. You don't need the universes to actually exist in order to say they're improbable. All you need to do is to have this, so to speak, logical space of possible universes described by different quantities and constants in order to say that finely tuned worlds are extremely rare.
I think it's a great question because we do have this tendency to speak informally about probabilities, likelihoods, and so forth. And even professional cosmologists do this when we talk about the early universe. That seems improbable, unlikely, unnatural is the usual term that we use. And sometimes we're just totally wrong about that. And so the example that Dr. Craig just gave about the blue dots and the red dots sadly almost never applies in cosmology because it assumes there is a discrete set of dots that we can color, blue or red. Usually in cosmology there's a continuous spectrum of possibilities. And in that case it's much harder to even imagine assigning probabilities consistently. The example I gave, which was then sort of not talked about later, was the expansion rate of the early universe. There was a naive argument that it says it's very improbable. When you look more carefully you realize it's extremely probable. So this is not a definitive answer as to what the correct answer is, but I'm agreeing with your implication. We should be very, very careful when using words like that.
I'm really glad we're almost out of video. We've got 30 seconds left. I imagine that either the mod is about to come out and say that's all the time we have. Thanks, folks. Have a good night. Or they just didn't record any more of the Q&A for whatever reason. But I'm glad he mentioned spectrum because that raises an interesting possibility. Every time we find a situation similar to what Craig described, where we have to do an analysis of dots, points of data, and it creates something that seems like a improbability or even a paradox that leaves the door open for God. Once we learn what's actually behind that, it always turns out to be a spectrum. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Clearly, God must have created one or the other. No, actually, it was evolution that created the chicken to lay the egg, and so forth. So, pictured this
it's
way,
black and white thinking kind of thing. It's very black and white. You know, it's very,
yeah, that's the thing. Purple piece of paper. Yeah, quite so. It reminds me of Owen, and thank you for the recipe. I don't know when I'll have a chance to try cooking it, but I do appreciate that very, very much. But it reminds me of an idea that in the 80s, before the Wilkinson microwave anisotropy probe confirmed the Big Bang for sure happened, there was this idea that the universe might be infinite and that laws of physics were only locally constant. Like if you go to the next galaxy over, the constants will be slightly different, and the next galaxy over, they'll be slightly different, and eventually
Yeah.
they'll get weirder and weirder until you're at the point of the edge of the observable universe. Beyond that point, physics is so different, we can't see it from here. But from that point, you can see into it, and you can also, Earth then would be on the edge of the observable universe from that point, because that's the maximum difference of the physical laws. And
Right.
we don't see any evidence of that so far, at least that we can tell from, our big space telescopes.
Yeah.
But it's still an interesting thought idea, not even a thought experiment, thought idea. That sounds redundant, but work with me here, to keep in mind, because it may help us wrap our minds around whatever turns out to be outside the universe, if in fact there is an outside the universe.
Yeah, but this is the thing, which we just don't know, and I think you're right that Lane is William Lane Craig is sort of just going with improbable because it supports his worldview. He hasn't actually calculated this probability. I think that the girl was absolutely right. How do you calculate with a sample size of one? You can't do ordinary statistical data analysis. And just imagining other worlds, like, could you imagine if you did a statistical data analysis and you said, all right, well, I've got this one person and they have this thing that's happening in their life. And they say, well, a sample size of one isn't very good. And you say, well, you don't have to. All you have to do is imagine the other people that this is happening to and decide that it's very improbable. You can't imagine these other worlds. Like, you can't do that for statistical data analysis. What are you talking about? I think that he didn't want to say he was using Bayesian analysis to sort of do those priors to give him that improbable, but that's essentially what he's doing. That's what fine-tuning hinges on, because even the complexity of life for fine-tuning, the Earth's fine-tuning to any of these fine-tuning, they all rely on Bayesian analysis. They always do.
It's the only tool available when you have no actual data to do an analysis with.
Yeah, when you have an insufficient sample size, yes. Sufficient sample size usually is about 300 to get any approach at a statistically significant result. 300 is a bare minimum, usually.
Yeah, and even then only within, well, to borrow the creationist word, the same kind. Like, you can't just say, oh, we have, 1,200 discovered exoplanets, so we can calculate the probability of finding Earth or an Earth-like world again. Because, no. You need to find 300 or more planets that are the right mass in the right orbit, probably with a big giant moon. We don't know for sure if that's required to have Earth-like conditions or not, but it seems likely. And all these, you have to have the right characteristics in order for that bare minimum sample size to work. If you start calculating Jupiter's in there, it's not going to give you that result.
No, what you've got to do is know out of that 300, that where you've got to find 300 planets of a certain size or shape or whatever, and calculate how many of them do actually have life on them, right? So once you've got that, you can then start to say, hey, out of these 1,000 planets, we've got 10 with life on them, therefore P equals 0.01 kind of thing. That's what you can calculate. The problem comes that if you're just saying, hey, there's these 300 exoplanets, and we don't know the results of them, you still only have a sample size of 1 because you're looking at the number of Earth-like planets with life on them. That's your sample. Does that make sense?
Yeah, like well, for
Okay,
that,
so just say you're testing for something different. Just say you're testing for the number of Earth-like planets that have a moon like our moon, right? So a satellite like the moon. We could test for that if we can determine how many of those planets actually have a moon around them. But then we wouldn't be testing for life. We would only be able to apply that probability to the amount that have a moon. So we need to know the answer, the definitive answer for that sample in order to apply it to the rest of the exoplanets.
okay, yeah. And then if we could test for both, then we could see if there's some kind of correlation. But first,
Correct.
we have to have the first set of data.
Yeah. Well, in order to make any statistical comment on life on exoplanets, we have to have a sample of, like, if we manage to go to other exoplanets, we find 1,000 exoplanets, and none of them have life on, we can say, hey, P equals 1 in 1,000 because we've got our own, we've got one. Or it could just be, you know, that lurking variable could just be really highly unlikely or even impossible. Maybe life only started on one planet, but we need to know the data first, and we don't have that. That's the problem. We don't have that, and we certainly don't have any data about other worlds. So, you know, I think William Lane Craig is kind of talking out of his ass a bit, to be honest with you.
Yep. All right, we got 31 seconds left. Let's see if anything interesting happens.
All right. Well, our time is up.
Oh.
But this has been.
No.
I know.
Can I point something out? Can I just point something out? What the hell is Tactical Faith? This is Tactical Faith live stream. What is Tactical Faith? Is that like people bust into your house with crucifixes and, you know, come down on rappelling lines with halos? And what is Tactical Faith exactly?
I didn't even realize it said. I saw the actical, but I thought it was actual because I didn't even look at it that closely. I didn't realize that first letter was a T.
No, it's
because it's a cross.
Faith. Yeah.
Tactical Faith, nonprofit organization, Birmingham, Alabama. Tactical Faith is the rare organization that seeks to benefit everyone in apologetics. They bridge the gap.
Oh, yeah, that's really rare. That's really rare that they want to.
I know.
Helping out their apologists. That's just unknown, unheard of. What the hell?
I
really?
know. It's like that dude from earlier that I was talking about, Isaiah Saldivar. His first proof of why Christianity is the only true religion is, and I'm going to try to quote him here. He says the first proof, write this down, is nobody talks about this. Miracles. Miracles are proof of God.
Oh, yeah, like, nobody's ever mentioned them.
Nobody talks about this, huh? Okay. There's a reason I called that video the Try Not to Laugh Challenge Jesus Edition. Okay, so yeah, that's time he's gonna thank people, and that's about it. It's interesting that both times we stopped, last time right at the intermission, and then this time it was both right before the moderator came out and said, "Okay, we're done with this part." It's like we're prophets or something.
I know. I will be accepting donations to the Church of the let's see, what can I make my church? The Church of the Infernally Damned Emus. Sign up now. Emus are the devil. How long is your stream? I noticed you had a stream going at the same time, Gur. You're like stream sniping us. I bet you don't have enough ideas on your own and you're just coming over here to steal ours. I'm convinced of that. Nobody can tell me different. Wait, you're still live.
Your stream is still going, Gur? What the hell? I think I don't know for sure. Rebecca was there when the stream started.
Really?
I think
like
Gur is hiding from, or maybe it's Math Pig. Are you hiding from Math Pig?
I haven't seen Math Pig round lately, actually.
Math Pig
I
was
hope
in
he's
that stream. Yeah.
Oh, was he? Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. And thank you, Gur. Yeah. Please do
All right,
take a
Gur.
moment
Well,
if you're
I'm going to
new
give you
here.
a thumbs up. I'm going to give you a thumbs up just as long as you know that I'm doing it ironically, okay? Just letting you know.
Yeah. But like, subscribe, share, click buttons, do all the fun things. It helps.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Definitely share. Send your friends, send them to part 1 first, because then it'll make sense. But you can be like, this is the best debate. There's both debate and science and crazy people doing things and drop bears, all kinds of cool stuff over here. Saint Gur resurrected Math Pig. Yeah, all kinds of fun stuff. Shoot, I got completely derailed. So, yeah, what do you have coming up, Mark?
Well, I've got a debate tomorrow night, I think. I'll just double check that so I don't lead you astray. On Modern Day Debate, which should be fun. Apparently, it's a new guy who's wants to debate creation versus evolution. So I'm known to do the odd evolution debate, and I'd love to see his ideas on creation. Yeah, live in 18 hours. So tomorrow night at 8 o'clock on Modern Day Debate, I'm going to be stepping into the ring. And if you don't want to go to Modern Day Debate, that's cool. I'll upload it as soon as possible. I got another debate coming up, which I'm really excited about, which is Hassan, who's this Muslim guy. I really like him. He's a really cordial guy on morality, like secular versus Muslim morality. And I firmly think I've got the upper hand on that one, quite frankly, because of all of the, wife beating and apostasy stuff, that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah. It has the potential to be interesting, though.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like talking to Hassan, so that should be fun.
Yeah, cool beans. As for me, everything's chaos. It's looking more and more likely I'm going to have to take another job and end up scaling way back on how much I produce for YouTube so I can have time for that. But I don't know. That probably means I'll be more live stream sided than pre-recorded video sided, but we'll see how it all works out. But for the foreseeable future, I've got Aaron's show at 6 Eastern time tomorrow, reading Joseph Smith. It's more fun than the Bible reading ones because we literally just make fun of the text, and it's fantastic. I may or may not have a show after that as per usual, but then there's Bad Science Sunday, and I'm going to be guest hosting. So that should be really fun. Maya's picked out a fantastic video for us to pick on.
Oh, cool.
So I will definitely be over there, which means I'll definitely have to watch your mirror of your debate.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. Yeah.
But,
no worries.
Yeah.
No worries at all.
Yeah. That's why the mirror thing happens. It's good
It's
stuff.
all good. There's too much going on. Like we atheists are up to too much business. So yeah. Totally
For sure. Like tonight we're doing this, and this Gur fellow is having another stream at the same time.
I know. How rude.
Yeah.
How rude.
But yeah, extra jobs are lame as hell. But we got to pay bills. Stupid bills. We need universal basic income or something. But yeah, we're gonna have some stuff coming up next week. I believe Aaron's Bible shows are on hiatus this next week, partly because of Lawrence's procedure for one day, and Aaron will be traveling on the other day. But that'll be back on August 30th. But we are going to have the Sunday Joseph Smith shows. And the only other thing I know for sure off the top of my head is next Thursday, I'm doing a mega stream for my birthday. I still don't have all the details ironed out, but I have a lot of videos to cover, and I'm going to try to do all of them and then have an open room because it's my fucking birthday. Haha. So if you can, do drop by.
Yeah, I'll definitely swing by. Yeah, absolutely. And happy birthday in advance. I'll definitely be there for your birthday.
Thank you. Yeah, it should be an interesting time. If I do get too worn out, I'll just hold the rest of the videos for later and just go right to the open room. So it should be okay. But I think I've got it worked out so I can step away from the computer when I have to, because if you do a long stream, there's times when you have to, you know? So
Yeah.
but we'll see how it goes. It'll be interesting to try anyway for science.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think that covers everything. Thank you guys all for joining us. Mark, as always, thanks for
Always a
doing these
pleasure.
crazy things with me. It's always a good time. And next week, back over on Mark's channel, because we keep bouncing back and forth. Yep.
Yep. I want to try and find a shorter one. So occasionally we should find a shorter one so you can do the part 1 and I can do the part 2 and then vice versa kind of thing. So I think you found something short. So I might find something short as well and then switch it back. I guess I guess whoever gets sick of finding the clip could get a short one and flip it to the other person. I didn't quite think about that until I mentioned it, but yeah, that's good. I could, you know, if you're sick of finding these debates, then you could flip it back to me and vice versa. So that's cool. That's fun.
Yeah, it's a possibility. I've got a couple already in the tank because I had a request for Dan Barker. Because we haven't covered him yet, and he's got a couple of those legendary arguments that get made into memes. Yeah, I'll send you the links for the ones I have, and it's a possibility.
I'll find something short and then flip it back to you so you can choose the next one, kind of thing. How does that sound?
Okie doke. Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not super serious. We're just going with these as we go.
No,
anyway.
it is. It's deadly serious. It's the most serious thing I've ever done in my life.
Absolutely.
Yeah. This has been fun. I you know what? It kind of it makes me a liar. I always go, William Lane Craig isn't that bad, and then I watch his debates and went, he's really that bad, isn't he? Like. I think that he is one of the best, and that's tragic, you know, with all of the stuff that he put on.
It really
it's
is.
It's kind of, you know, his straw manning was out of control. Like, I don't know how many times Sean Carroll said, not popped into existence. Let's not use that terminology. That's not what we're saying. You know, it didn't have a beginning. I wish that he would have sort of represented his position correctly, instead of going, well, no, you've got to believe it came into existence. It's like, well, he's saying he doesn't. So where does that leave your argument?
Well, you know why he does that? Because he's a tapier.
Oh, that's why.
Yep. Deep lore on that one. It's not that deep. It's a dick joke. There's a link to the birthday stream thing. According to YouTube, I've currently got it scheduled for starting at 1:45 p.m. Eastern. That may move, but that's where it is right now. Yeah. But like I said, it's the idea is to go all day, and I don't want to start so early that I'm dead by the time most people would actually be around.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll drop in, but certainly not at 1:45 and at night kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure.
I'll probably be asleep at that point. But.
Yeah, fair enough. Absolutely. But yeah, it may move. It's just that's kind of the placeholder time, so I could set it up. But yeah, we'll see how it goes. All right, I think that just about does it for today. So once again, thank you guys all so much for joining us. And
thank you.
And remember that you don't have to pop into existence because you're better than religion. Good night.
But wait, if you didn't pop into existence, who created you? Oh, what the hell?